There is a moment every human being has felt at least once. You are standing at the edge of a forest as the light drains out of the sky. The trees in front of you are turning from green to grey to black. And somewhere, in that darkness, something shifts. A branch settles. A bird goes quiet, mid-song. The hair on your arms rises. And a very old part of your brain, a part that has nothing to do with the modern world, tells you something simple and certain. You are being watched. The Greeks had a name for the one doing the watching. Today her name rides on the side of rockets. When America decided to return to the moon, to land the first woman on its surface, the program needed a name, and the engineers reached back 4,000 years and chose her. Artemis. Most people know that much. Goddess of the hunt, goddess of the moon, sister of Apollo. Almost nobody knows the rest of it. They don't know about the girl of 3 years old who sat on her father's knee and asked for freedom before she was old enough to understand what it would cost. They don't know about the friend she lost to a cruelty she could not undo, or the hunter she loved and killed with a single perfect shot, or the door she guarded at every birth in the ancient world, or the one room in all of existence that she herself was never allowed to enter. She asked for freedom before she knew the price of it. She got everything she asked for. This is the story of everything she never asked for, and what it took from her anyway. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow down. The forest is open tonight. We're going in. Start with the forest. Not a storybook forest. A real one. A mountain forest in the region the Greeks called Arcadia. In the hours after midnight, when the cold comes up out of the ground instead of down from the sky, the air smells like wet pine needles and stone. Farther down the slope, water is moving over rocks, and the sound carries in the dark, the way sound only carries when everything else has gone still. A deer steps into a clearing. She is careful about it, the way deer are careful, one leg at a time, her weight settling slowly, her ears turning in small precise movements like instruments taking a reading. She lowers her head to the grass. She eats. Her ears keep working the whole time, sweeping the dark, and then both of them swing around and lock onto the same point between the trees. She holds completely still. Nothing over there is making a sound. That is exactly the problem. A forest at night is full of small noises, and the deer knows all of them the way you know the sounds of your own house. What stops her heart is the silence. Something is moving through those trees without making any sound at all, and only one thing in the world moves like that. The deer relaxes. Her ears soften. She goes back to the grass. Whatever is out there, it is not hunting tonight. And the wild things always know the difference. The Greeks who lived at the edges of forests like this one, in villages where the wilderness began, at the last fence post, believed they knew what walked out there in the dark. They gave her a name, and they said her name carefully, and they built her shrines at the exact point where the village ended and the trees began, right on the line, because the line was hers. Her name was Artemis. If you asked an ancient Greek who she was, you would not get a simple answer, because she was never a simple goddess. She ruled the hunt. Yes. The bow. Yes. But go deeper into what people actually prayed to her about, and a stranger picture comes up out of the sources. There are gods who rule cities. There are gods who rule the sea, and the sky, and the dead. Artemis ruled the places where human beings start to feel small. The dark forest past the last streetlight of the ancient world, the mountain path where the trail gives out and the map means nothing, the birthing room at 3 in the morning, where a new life and a mother's life balance on the same thin edge, the last night of a girl's childhood, when her dolls go to the altar and the wedding waits at sunrise, the moment a hunter raises his bow at something he was never supposed to touch. Every one of those places is a boundary, a line between one world and another, between the town and the wild, between childhood and whatever comes after, between being alive and being gone. She stood on every one of those lines. That was her kingdom. Not a palace, not a mountain throne, not a city with her name over the gates. A kingdom made entirely of edges. And here is the first thing you need to understand about her. The thing that separates her from every other god in the Greek imagination. Her twin brother drove the sun every morning of the world. Apollo took the reins of a golden chariot and carried light across the sky. And every living thing beneath him turned its face up toward the warmth. He was the most visible being in existence. Temples at the center of cities. His name above the doors. Crowds lined up before dawn at Delphi just to ask him questions. He was the god everyone looked at. His sister was the goddess no one was allowed to see. Think about how strange that is. Twins, born on the same island, on the same morning, minutes apart. One of them becomes the light itself, the thing that shows the world to everyone. The other walks into the trees and becomes the dark the light never reaches. He collected worshippers the way a lamp collects moths. She kept an entire wilderness between herself and anyone who wanted to get close. People made the mistake sometimes. Over the centuries, a handful of mortals crossed into her territory, or looked at what they should not have looked at, or reached for what was never going to be theirs. The stories about what happened to them were told all over the Greek world, at night, in low voices, and we are going to walk through those stories together. The hunter by the pool, the queen in the square at Thebes, the giant who could stride across the open sea, the girl in the wedding dress at Aulis. But those stories come later, and there is something you have to see first, because without it, none of the rest makes sense. You have to see where she came from. You have to see the small flat island, and the exhausted woman holding a palm tree, and the strange, quiet firstborn child who entered the world a few minutes ahead of the sun. Because the deepest truth about Artemis is not in the punishments. It is in the beginning. She was a goddess who spent 4,000 years refusing to be held. And the refusal started somewhere. It started on the first morning of her life, in the first hour, with the first thing she ever saw. Most newborns open their eyes and see their mother's face. She opened hers and saw her mother's pain. The forest can wait for us. It has been waiting a long time already, and it is patient, the way all wild places are patient. The moon is climbing over the ridge now, and the deer has finished with the clearing and slipped back into the trees. And the presence that was watching from the dark has turned and started moving north, without a sound, toward a story that begins on the open water of the Aegean Sea. Follow it. The sea, at night, in the time before the story has a shape, and a woman crossing it with nowhere to go. Her name was Leto, and if you have traveled with us before, you know her road already. She was carrying the twin children of Zeus, and for that, the queen of the gods had shut the world against her. Hera sent word across every coast and every island. No land was to receive this woman. No shore was to let her rest. Any ground that took her in would answer for it. So the doors closed, one after another, the whole way around the Aegean. Leto walked and sailed and asked, and was told no, and walked on. The world is enormous when it wants you. It shrinks to the width of your own 2 feet when it does not. She was past tired. She had entered the kind of exhaustion that lives behind the eyes and under the ribs, the kind sleep doesn't touch, and the 2 lives she was carrying were running out of time, because children arrive when they arrive, and hers were close now, and there was still not 1 hand's breadth of ground on the earth where she was allowed to lie down. Then she remembered the island that didn't count. It was a low, flat scrap of rock called Delos, so small and so poor that the map-makers barely bothered with it. One spring, one palm tree, some scrub grass, and pale stony beaches. And it had one property that no other place in the world had. It floated. It drifted loose on the water, unanchored to the seabed, wandering wherever the currents pushed it. Hera's decree covered every land attached to the earth. Delos was not attached to anything. Leto stepped onto the pale shore in the dark, and the ground held her, and nothing anywhere told her to leave. She walked to the one palm tree at the center of the island and wrapped her arms around it and held on. The labor took a long time. Hera saw to that too, holding back the goddess of childbirth for as long as spite could manage it. Leto knelt at the base of the palm tree through hours that stretched and bent the way hours do in the worst nights of a life. And the wind came off the water, and the island drifted quietly under her, and she held the tree and endured. And then, without ceremony, without any sign in the sky, the first child came, a girl. Here is what the old accounts say about her, and it may be the strangest detail in all of Greek myth. The girl arrived quietly, no trembling ground, no golden light on the water. She simply arrived, took one breath of the cold salt air, and then turned toward her mother, because her mother's ordeal was not over. There was a second child still to come, the boy, and he was not coming easily. And there was no midwife on that empty rock. There was nobody at all. So the firstborn helped. Minutes old, the accounts say, minutes into her existence, and she was already working, already steadying her mother through the second birth, already doing the thing she would do beside 10,000 birthing beds across the next 4,000 years. The Greeks never forgot this. Ask them why a virgin goddess, of all beings, watched over women in childbirth, and they would point you here, to this island, to this hour. She was a midwife before she was a full hour old. It was the first thing she ever did. Stay with that image a moment, because the whole story lives inside it. The first thing most newborns see is their mother's face. Calm, exhausted, turned toward them in wonder. The first thing this child saw was her mother in agony, alone, gripping a tree on a rock in the middle of a hostile sea, with every door in the world locked against her, all because Zeus wanted what Zeus wanted, and Hera made Leto pay the price for it. That was her first lesson, and nobody had to teach it. She saw, in her first minutes, exactly what the world could do to a woman, what love could cost, what the powerful took, and who ended up paying. She saw it before she saw anything else. And there is a kind of knowing that comes that early and never leaves. Then her brother was born, and the world lost its mind. The island shook, gently, like something enormous settling into place. The palm tree bloomed out of season. Swans came in off the water and circled the island 7 times. Calling, the sea around Delos turned gold. Actual gold. Light rising up through the blue from underneath. And the island itself, which had drifted rootless on the currents since the beginning of things, stopped. It anchored itself to the floor of the sea in that hour, and it never moved again. Sailors would swear to this for the rest of antiquity. Delos held still because Apollo was born on it. All of that for the second child. For the first, nothing. No sphinx. No gold water. No trembling. She had arrived in silence and gone straight to work. And by the time the world started celebrating, she was simply there in the middle of it, a few minutes old, watching the light show that greeted her brother. You could read bitterness into that if you wanted to. The old poets never did, and they were right not to, because the truth about her runs stranger and deeper than jealousy. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything for 4,000 years. That was practically her job description. But somewhere in her first hours of existence, watching the swans circle for somebody else, this child seems to have reached a conclusion that would organize the rest of her long life. The world's attention was a current, like the currents that had pushed this island around the sea. It flowed where it flowed. Her brother would live in the middle of that current forever, and it would give him temples and festivals and glory, and it would also, though nobody knew it yet, cost him almost everything he ever loved. He would spend his whole existence being seen, and being seen would never once make him less alone. She watched the gold fade off the water, and somewhere in her, quietly, a decision started forming. She didn't want the current. She wanted the still water. She wanted the places attention never reached. The dark, past the tree line. The country on the far side of every fence. If the world was going to spend its love on her brother, fine. The world could keep its love. She would take something better. She was 3 years old when she finally said it out loud. And she said it, sitting on the knee of the most powerful being in the universe. And what she asked for was so strange, so complete, and so unheard of that her father laughed out loud in the great hall of Olympus. It was not a request. Really, it was a list. The great hall of Olympus was built to make everything in it feel small. The ceiling was somewhere up in its own weather. The columns were the size of old forest trees. Light moved through the place the way light moves through the highest part of the sky, thin and gold and cold. And the beings who gathered there were the most powerful beings in existence. And even they lowered their voices a little when they crossed the threshold. At the far end of the hall sat Zeus, king of the gods, on a throne that generations of sculptors would spend their whole careers trying to imagine correctly, and on his knee, on this particular day, sat a girl of 3 years old. She had climbed up there herself. Nobody had lifted her. She had walked the length of that enormous hall on her small legs, past gods who had leveled cities, and she had climbed onto the knee of the Lord of the Sky, the way any daughter climbs onto any father. And then she had settled herself, and gotten comfortable, and reached up with one small hand and taken hold of his beard. She had come to negotiate. The old poet Callimachus preserved this scene, and of everything written about her across 4,000 years, nothing else comes close to it, because the girl had not come to play, and she had not come to be admired. She had come with a list. She had thought about it, apparently for some time, in the way that small children think about enormous things, completely and in secret. And now, holding her father's beard, looking up at the face that made the whole sky obey, she began to go through it, item by item. "Papa," she said, "give me my wishes. First, let me stay a virgin forever. Let no man ever have me. No marriage ever bind me. No household ever close its doors around me. Let me belong to myself for the whole length of forever." Zeus looked down at her. She was 3. "Second," she said, "give me as many names as my brother." Apollo was already collecting titles the way the sea collects rivers, and she had counted, and she was not going to spend eternity being introduced as somebody's sister. Third, a bow and arrows, and she was specific about this. She did not want a toy, and she did not want something pretty from a jeweler's bench. She wanted her bow made by the Cyclopes themselves, the one-eyed giants who forged the thunderbolts her father was holding at that very moment. She wanted the same craftsman who armed the king of the universe. Fourth, a short tunic, cut above the knee, with a bright border, for running. This one matters more than it sounds like it matters. The women of the Greek world wore their dresses to the ankle, and they walked accordingly, and the whole shape of their lives was sewn into that hemline. A girl who dresses to run is a girl who has already decided how she plans to live. Fifth, 60 daughters of the ocean to be her companions, all of them 9 years old, and 20 river nymphs to tend her boots and feed her hunting dogs when the day's chase was over. Sixth, and here the list stopped being charming and became something else. Give me all the mountains, she said. Every mountain on the earth. Every high, wild place where the roads give out. And then, almost as an afterthought, she added the strangest line in the whole request. And any city. Whichever one you like. One is enough. She said it the way you might decline a second helping at dinner. Politely, without much interest. I am not going to live in the cities anyway, she told him. I will live on the mountains. I will only visit the towns when the women there cry out for me, in the sharp hours of childbirth, because on the day I was born, the fates appointed me their helper. 3 years old. Remember. And already she knew about that first hour on Delos. Already she carried it as an assignment. Sit with this list a moment, the way her father must have. Every single item on it points the same direction. The eternal virginity, which in her world meant eternal self-ownership. The running clothes. The companions, who were all girls. All young. All sworn to the same freedom. The mountains instead of the cities. Even the bow, which is the weapon of distance. The weapon of someone who has decided in advance how close the world is going to be allowed to come. A 3-year-old sat on her father's knee and asked, in effect, for a permanent exemption from marriage, from ownership, from the reach of men, from every net her world had already woven, and was waiting to throw over her the moment she grew into it. And the question that hangs over the whole scene, the question the poets never quite asked out loud, is a simple one. How did she know? How does a child that young know exactly what the world is going to demand of her? So precisely that she can list the demands one by one and refuse each of them in advance, before the world has even had the chance to ask. Maybe the answer is Delos. Maybe it goes back to that first hour, and the first thing she ever saw. She had watched what the world did to her mother. She had seen what loving Zeus cost Leto. Every door on every coast, locked against a woman whose only crime was being wanted by someone powerful. Some children learn by being told. This one learned by arriving, mid-catastrophe, with her eyes open. Whatever the reason, Zeus did not laugh at her. The accounts are clear about this, and it is worth being clear about too. He laughed, but it was the other kind of laughter. The kind of father laughs when he looks at a child and unexpectedly meets his own eyes looking back. Here was the wildness in him, the part that had never once done what it was told, sitting on his knee in a small, fierce package, pulling his beard, negotiating. When children like you are born to me, he said, the anger of Hera means nothing at all. And he gave it to her. All of it. Every item. Straight down the list. The freedom. The names. The tunic. The 60 companions. The mountains. All of them. Every peak on the earth. He signed away the wild places of the world to a 3-year-old. And by every account, he never regretted it. The bow took a little longer, because the bow had to be made. They went to the forge of the Cyclopes, on the island of Lipara, where the giants were hammering out a horse trough for Poseidon at the time. The old stories pause here for a detail that tells you everything. The ocean nymphs, her 60 young companions, took one look at the Cyclopes and could not bear it. The giants stood as tall as cliffs. Each had a single eye, the size of a war shield, glaring out from under one brow. The sound of their hammers rang off the anvils so hard that the island itself boomed like a struck bell, and the nymphs covered their ears and hid. The girl walked straight in, 3 years old, into the fire and the noise and the iron smell, past hammers that outweighed her whole existence, and she planted herself in front of the largest creatures she had ever seen and told them what she wanted. A silver bow, arrows to match, a quiver to carry them. The giants looked down. Then they set aside the god of the sea's unfinished horse trough, and they built a little girl, her weapons. She paid attention while they worked. That detail survives too. She did not wait outside. She watched the silver go into the fire and come out changed. Watched the great hands do their impossibly fine work. Sparks drifting up past her face in the dark of the forge. And when it was finished, when they placed the bow in her hands, still warm from the making, something in the universe quietly shifted, the way it shifts when a thing finds the hands it was always meant for. She promised them her first kill. Then she turned and walked out of the forge, past the hiding nymphs, out into the daylight, carrying the silver bow that would still be hers when Rome fell, when the temples emptied, when her name was painted on the hull of a machine bound for the moon. She had everything now, every item on the list. Her freedom was official, signed and sealed by the King of the Sky himself, and no power in existence could revoke it. Remember that. Hold on to it through everything that is coming. Every dark valley of this story, every loss. She got everything on the list. Every single item. Honored in full. Forever. And the whole story you are about to hear turns on the one thing no list can cover. There is a mountain in Greece where you can watch the night and the morning exist at the same time. Stand on the summit ridge in the last hour of darkness, facing east, and the sky in front of you is already going pale, grey, then silver, then that first thin line of gold along the rim of the sea. The world on that side is waking up, fishing boats putting out from the harbours, smoke starting up from the first hearths, the cities stretching in their sleep. Now turn around, behind you, to the west. It is still night. The valleys on that side are lakes of shadow. The forests hold their darkness the way deep water holds its cold. And the moon is still up over there, low and white, hanging above ridgelines where nothing human has ever built anything. And nothing human is awake. Two worlds, back to back, on one mountain. Now put the twins on that summit, and you have the truest picture of them that exists. The brother faces east. Of course he does. The east is his entire portfolio. Sunrise, and the cities waking under it, and the temples catching the first light, and the questions already forming in 10,000 minds that will need answers today, and the music, and the crowds. Everything in him leans toward the warm and waking side of the world. In a little while, he will take the reins of the chariot and pull the morning up over the edge of the sea, and every living thing below will turn its face toward him. The sister faces west, toward the dark half, toward the moon, over the empty ridges, the black valleys, the country without names, everything over there that is still wild, still cold, still free of roads, belongs to her, signed over by her father. Every mountain on the earth. They stand back to back a moment longer, and then, without a word, they step off the summit in opposite directions. He into the light, she into the dark. And this is how it would be between them for 4,000 years. He went to the center of everything. She went to the edge. He chose Delphi, the crowded sanctuary, the lines of pilgrims forming before dawn, the whole apparatus of being needed. He built his life in the middle of the human world, at the point of maximum attention, and he answered questions for a civilization. She chose the exact opposite point on the map, the place past the last farm, past the last fence, past the last place with a name. If you wanted him, you traveled to the center and waited in line. If you wanted her, there was nowhere to travel, because she was wherever you were not. And yet, look at what they are each carrying, there on the mountain, as they walk away from each other. The same weapon. Out of every instrument, the Greek imagination could have handed its gods. The twins carry matching bows, not the sword, which demands you stand close enough to smell the other man's breath, not the spear, which is still an arm's-length weapon at its heart. The bow, the weapon of distance, you hold absolutely still. You calculate where something is going to be. You release, and you change a life from a place it cannot see you and will never reach. Both of them fought that way. Both of them loved that way. If we are honest, and this whole story is going to be honest, and both of them, in the entire history of everything written about them, never once missed. But here is where the mirror splits. And here is the thing to carry with you through every chapter that follows. His distance was a cage. Hers was a kingdom. Think about his story. The one some of you already know. Apollo spent 4,000 years reaching across the space between himself and the things he loved. And the space defeated him every single time. Daphne, becoming a laurel tree under his hands. Hyacinthus, bleeding out in a field on a beautiful morning. He wanted closeness, wanted it desperately, and simply did not know how to cross the last few feet of air between himself and another soul. His distance was a condition, something he suffered from, something he would have given up in a heartbeat if he had ever figured out how. Her distance was the entire point. She asked for it at 3 years old, item by item, on her father's knee. She built her whole existence inside it, on purpose, with her eyes open. The mountains, the running clothes, the companions sworn to the same solitude. The bow. Nobody sentenced her to the edge of the world. She read the world carefully, saw what it did to women who could be reached, and moved permanently out of reach. Her distance was not a wall she was trapped behind. It was a wall she had commissioned, and she inspected it with satisfaction, and she slept well inside it. Which raises the question this whole story is secretly about. A question you can hold on to tonight as you drift, because there is no rush to answer it, and the story will answer it for us in its own time. Is chosen distance lonely? If you build the wall yourself, does it hurt less when you are the only one inside it? She believed the answer was yes. She believed it completely, with the certainty of someone who got her whole list granted and never once had to test the fine print. For a long age of the world, nothing happened to make her doubt it. Remember that she believed it. It matters later, for all their difference. You should not picture them as strangers, or rivals, or a light side and a dark side at war. The truth about the twins is quieter than that, and better. Once a year, the accounts say, they met at Delos, the little island where it all started. Still anchored exactly where his birth had pinned it to the seabed. He would come from the crowds and the questions. She would come down out of the mountains with the smell of pine and cold stone still on her, and for a little while, the two most powerful archers in existence would simply be in the same place. On the pale beach where their mother had held the palm tree, in the dark. We have no record of what they talked about. That is probably because they mostly did not. Picture it instead as the kind of silence that only exists between two people who have known each other since before either of them was a full hour old. He did not perform for her. She did not guard against him. He wanted nothing from her, and she wanted nothing from him. And if you have ever had one person like that in your life, one person you could sit beside without arranging your face, you know, it is worth more than most kinds of love that make more noise. They were, each of them, the one person the other never had to explain anything to. Hold that picture, the two of them on the beach at Delos in the late afternoon. The swans, still nesting there after all these years. The sea doing its long, slow work against the shore. Hold it, because the road ahead of us runs through some dark country. And near the end of that road, something is going to happen between these two that neither of them will ever put into words. A silence of a different kind is coming for the beach at Delos, but that is far away still, years and years away. Right now she is young, and the ink on her father's promise is barely dry, and the silver bow is new in her hand, and every mountain on the surface of the earth belongs to her. She comes down off the summit into the trees on the dark side, moving the way she moves, without a sound, and the wild country opens ahead of her for 1,000 miles, and the wild things lift their heads as she passes. The deer in the thickets, the bears in the high caves, the wolves, the heron, the mountain lions, the foxes, every creature that had lived since the beginning of things, without a protector, without a patron, without anyone in the halls of power who spoke for them. Someone was walking into their country now, someone who had chosen them over every city on the earth. There is a small house on the edge of a Greek town, on a night about 2,500 years ago, and inside it, an oil lamp is burning late. The town could be anywhere. Attica, maybe, or the Peloponnese, one of 1,000 towns, just like it. Whitewashed walls and narrow lanes, and the smell of the day's bread still hanging in the air. Everyone else in the house has gone to sleep. The lamp is burning in the smallest room, and by its light, a girl of 15 is sitting on the floor, going through her things. Tomorrow morning, she gets married. She has known the man for a total of perhaps 1 hour of her life. Her father arranged it, the way fathers arranged everything. And by this time tomorrow, she will live in a different house, in a different part of town, under a different roof and a different name. And the room she is sitting in right now will belong to her past. But that is tomorrow. Tonight there is one thing left to do, and every girl in the Greek world did it. And she is doing it now, alone, by lamplight. She is saying goodbye to her childhood, formally, object by object. On the floor in front of her sits a small wooden box, and out of it she takes a doll. It is a simple thing, cloth and stuffing, its face worn smooth from years of handling. She made clothes for this doll once. She whispered to it at night. She looks at it a long moment, and then she sets it aside, in a separate place, apart from everything she is keeping. Next the ball, the leather one she played with in the courtyard through 100 summers, set aside. A spinning top, set aside. A tambourine, set aside. And last, she reaches up with a small knife and cuts a lock of her own hair, the hair her mother has braided since before she can remember, and lays it with the rest. Tomorrow, on the way to the wedding, she will carry these things to a small altar, and she will leave them there. All of them, the doll and the ball and the top and the lock of hair. They are an offering, our doll, paid at a border crossing, because tonight this girl is standing on a boundary between two countries, childhood behind her, a husband's house ahead, and every boundary in the Greek world had its keeper. The altar belongs to Artemis. Here is the part of her story that never makes it into the paintings. We remember the huntress, the bow, the hounds, the punishments, the Greeks themselves, the actual people, living their actual lives, knew her first as something much closer to home. She was the goddess who owned girlhood, all of it, every girl in every town, from the day they were born to the morning they married. That whole green country of childhood belonged to Artemis, and everyone who lived in it was hers. Think about who she was, and it makes a deep kind of sense. She was the girl who refused the wedding. She sat on her father's knee at 3 years old and crossed marriage off her future like a line in a ledger. And she stayed on the girlhood side of the border forever. Eternally young, eternally unclaimed, running the mountains in a tunic cut for speed. Of course the girls belonged to her. She was the only power in the universe who lived where they lived. And so their lives were woven through with her. When a daughter was born, the household gave thanks to Artemis. When the girl grew, she danced in choruses at the festivals of Artemis. Whole lines of girls singing in the goddess's honor while the town watched. Her childhood had a patron, a protector, an address for its prayers. And then came the last night, the night we are watching through the lamplit window, and the toll at the border, and the goodbye. Because here is the strange, sad, beautiful mechanics of it. You could only be hers for a while. Marriage moved a woman into different territory, under different gods. Hera took over, the goddess of the wedding bond, and Aphrodite, and the hearth goddess of the new household. There was no place in a married woman's life for the huntress of the wild edges, so the border had to be crossed properly, respectfully, with the toll paid in full. And what the toll consisted of was everything childhood had been made of. The dolls went to Artemis. The games went to Artemis. The girl herself, everything she had been for 15 years, was left folded on the altar with the toys. And the woman walked on into her new country, empty-handed. Now stop and look at this arrangement from the other side of the altar. Every girl in the Greek world was raised in her keeping, and every single one of them, if life went the way life was supposed to go, left. That was the design. That was the whole shape of her kingdom. She was the goddess of a country everyone emigrated from, the keeper of a garden that existed to be outgrown. The dolls piled up on her altars year after year, generation after generation, each one the final signature of a girl who had been hers since birth and would never be hers again after sunrise. She had 60 companions sworn to stay. The rest of girlhood, all of it, everywhere, was just passing through. The Greeks did not think of her as lonely. It would not have occurred to them. And honestly, if you could ask her, it would not have occurred to her either. Certainly not in these early ages of the world, with the bow still new and the mountains still uncounted. Gods do not audit their own arrangements. She kept the border because the border was hers to keep. The girls came. The girls grew. The girls left their dolls and went. Water flows downhill. Spring turns into summer. There was nothing in it to mourn. But you are not a god, and you are allowed to notice things. So notice this, and then let it go, and we will not speak of it again for a long time. Every love in her life had a door built into it. The girls she protected were protected right up until the morning they walked out. Her own companions served at the pleasure of a vow, and vows, as we will learn in the dark country ahead of us, can be broken by force from outside. She had constructed an existence in which everything was hers temporarily and nothing was hers for keeps, and she had constructed it at 3 years old, and the construction was flawless, and it had exactly one property that its architect was too young to see. A kingdom where everyone is just passing through is a kingdom where every goodbye is scheduled in advance. The lamp in the small house gutters out. The girl sleeps her last night in her first life. In the morning, there will be songs, and a veil, and a procession, and, somewhere in the middle of it, a quiet moment at a roadside altar, a doll changing hands for the last time. And if, at that moment, the girl feels something at her back, a coolness A presence, a sense of being watched by something fond and wild, and already withdrawing. The old women would tell her, that is exactly what it is. The goddess comes to the border to see her girls across it. She does not hold on to them. She has never once held on to any of them. She watches them go. It is the family talent. Now come to a different house, in a different town, at 3 o'clock in the morning, some other year in the long life of the ancient world. This house is not asleep. Every lamp in it is lit. Water is heating over the fire, and the older women of the family are moving through the rooms with the brisk, unhurried economy of people who have done this before. And from the inner room comes the sound that has been the same in every century and every country since the beginning of the human race. A woman is in labor. She is young. This is her first. It began at sundown, and it has been climbing ever since. Hour over hour, wave over wave. And she has reached the stage where the world shrinks down to the size of the next breath. Her mother is with her. A midwife is with her. The men of the household have been sent somewhere else entirely, to wait and be useless, because this room, on this night, belongs to women, and to one other presence, because every woman in that room, if you asked her, would tell you who else was standing at the threshold tonight. They would tell you, without hesitation, in the way people speak about things that are simply true. The girl on the bed is not just in labor. She is crossing the most dangerous border in the human world. The border between one life in the room and two, and the border, like every border, has its keeper, somewhere at the edge of the lamplight, unseen, with her bow across her back. The keeper is standing watch. Artemis is at the door, and, if you have been paying attention, you should be confused, because this makes no sense at all. This is the virgin goddess, the one who crossed marriage off her list at 3 years old. She has never shared a bed, never carried a child, never once in her eternal existence come closer to this room's experience than the far side of its threshold. Of all the powers in the Greek sky, she should be the last one invited to a birth. The Greeks had mother goddesses to spare. Hera ruled marriage itself. Demeter was motherhood poured into a single form. The grain goddess, the great nourisher. Where are they tonight? Not here. The woman on the bed is not calling their names. When the pain crests and she cries out to heaven, the name in her mouth is the huntress. This was true in real houses, in real towns, for 1,000 years and more, of everything strange in the worship of Artemis. This is the strangest, and the Greeks knew it was strange, and they kept doing it anyway, because they knew something about her that the paintings forget. You know it too. You were there. Go back to the beginning with me. One more time. A flat rock in a cold sea. A woman alone against a palm tree. Locked out of the whole world. In labor with twins and no help coming. Ever. From anywhere. And a firstborn child who arrived in the middle of that catastrophe. Quietly. A few minutes ahead of her brother. And did the first thing she ever did in her existence. She turned around and helped. Minutes old. And already working. Already steadying her mother through the second, harder birth. The first hands that ever assisted at a delivery of a god belonged to a newborn. That was her origin, her first hour, her first act. And the Greeks reasoned about it the way the Greeks reasoned about everything, with a poet's logic that cuts deeper than sense. She has never given birth, they said, but she was born knowing the room. She is the only god who began her existence inside that danger. Eyes open, on the working side of it. The mother goddesses know motherhood. Artemis knows the border itself, the crossing, the hour when it hangs in the balance, and when you are on the border at 3 in the morning, you do not want the goddess of the destination. You want the keeper of the line. So they prayed to her. And here is where the story stops being charming and shows you its iron, because you need to understand what childbirth was in that world. Strip away every hospital, every instrument, every medicine, every transfusion. What remains is the most dangerous thing a Greek woman would ever do, and she would do it over and over across her married life. And the arithmetic was merciless. Historians still argue over the numbers, but the shape of it is beyond argument. In the ancient world, the birthing room killed more women than the battlefield killed men. Every single labor was a walk onto the line, and every woman walking onto it had watched other women, sisters, cousins, neighbors, friends, walk onto it and not come back. That is who was calling her name in the dark. People in mortal danger, calling the border keeper, because the border keeper decides who crosses, and she decided. That was the belief, stated plainly in the old sources, and it is a cold and honest belief, and we will not soften it. When the labor went well, when the child came and the mother lived, the family gave thanks to Artemis, and in time the woman would travel to one of the goddess's sanctuaries and dedicate her finest clothing in gratitude, folded and laid before the keeper who had seen her across. The treasuries of those temples filled up with the dresses of living, breathing, rescued women. And when it went the other way, when the lamps burned all night and the morning came to a silent house, the Greeks did not say the gods were absent. They said Artemis had been there too, and had made the other choice, and had released one of her arrows, the gentle kind, the painless kind, the arrow no one sees or hears. A woman who died in the birthing room died by the silver bow. That was how a whole civilization explained the unbearable to itself. Her death had a shape. Something had held her at the end. The keeper of the border had been present, had been attentive, had carried her across the other line, the oldest line of all, herself, at the sanctuary of Brauron, near Athens. They took this belief to its full conclusion. And I want you to see the place, because we will come back to it near the end of our story, in a much gentler chapter. Picture a temple treasury by lamplight, shelves and chests of folded cloth, the dedicated dresses of the women who lived, bright ones, fine owns, offered in joy, and alongside them, by ancient custom, the woven clothing of the women who did not live, brought by their grieving households and laid up in the same holy place. Both kinds, side by side, in her house, she received the thanks of the saved and the garments of the lost, and the Greeks saw no contradiction in it, because there was none. She had never promised anyone safe passage. Border keepers make no such promises. What she promised was the thing she had been doing since she was minutes old on a floating island, the only thing anyone can truly do, at the edge of life and death. She would be there. She would attend. Every laboring woman in every lamplit room in the Greek world got the same escort at the crossing. The goddess who had seen her own mother through it before she was an hour old, standing watch at the threshold, patient as the dark outside the door. She kept that watch for 1,000 years of human nights. She was keeping other watches too, in those same ages, out where the lamplight ends, because women in labor were only the second oldest citizens of her kingdom. Long before the first prayer from the first birthing room, she had walked into the high country with a new silver bow, and the wild things had lifted their heads and found that after all the ages of the world, something had finally arrived to belong to. The forest has been waiting for us to come back to it. Let's go and meet her animals. Come down to the stream now. The night is deep, and the moon is finally clearing the ridge. And this is the hour when the forest does its living. There is a pool where the water slows between two shelves of grey stone, and the moonlight lies on it in a long, unbroken sheet. And at the edge of that pool, a doe has come down to drink. Watch how she does it. She does not simply lower her head. She stands at the waterline a long moment first, reading the dark, her ears making their slow sweeps, her nostrils working the air. The water in front of her holds the moon. The pines behind her hold the night. Somewhere upslope, small feet move through old leaves, a fox or a marten going about its errand, and the doe files the sound away as harmless without even lifting her head. Then she drinks, and the moon on the water shivers into rings. This was her kingdom, this exact hour, this exact pool, not the marble temples the humans would build for her later, not the festivals or the processions. This, a doe drinking in safety, in the middle of the wild night, in a country where the wild things had a keeper. Because here is what the world was like before her. The old poets did not dwell on it, but you can see it if you look. Every god on Olympus had a constituency. Zeus had kings. Athena had cities and craftsmen. Poseidon had sailors. Demeter had farmers. Hephaestus had the smiths at their fires. Every corner of the human world had someone in the halls of power who spoke for it. And the animals had nobody. The deer, the bears, the wolves, the heron, the hares. All the uncounted creatures of the earth had lived since the beginning of things without a single voice on their side. Wild, ownerless, and alone. Then a girl of 3 years old asked her father for every mountain on the earth. And the animals had a goddess. She took them the way a queen takes a country. All of it. Every den and burrow and high cold nest. The old hymns say the wild things fawned on her when she passed. And that is a strange, lovely word for creatures the size of bears. But the poets chose it deliberately. Around her, the wildest things on earth behaved the way dogs behave around the one person they trust completely. She was not a visitor in their country. She was the country. Walking. Some of them stood closer to her than others. The deer came first. Deer were hers so completely that they were nearly a signature. And when the artists of Greece wanted to say Artemis without writing her name, they put a doe beside a young woman, and everyone understood. 5 golden hens, the stories say, drew her chariot when she bothered with a chariot at all. Deer, the size of bulls, with antlers of gold. And a 6th ran free because even she would not harness everything she loved. Deer were the shape of what she protected. Fast, watchful, gentle, unless cornered, and alive precisely as long as they stayed alert. The hounds came from Pan, the goat god of the deep country. And this is one of the small, warm scenes the tradition kept. He gave her a pack of his best. 7 from one litter, 6 from another. Dogs that could pull down lions. Dogs that could track a thing across bare stone by the ghost of its scent. She raised them herself. Her 20 river nymphs had one standing assignment: to feed the pack and rub them down when the day's hunt was over. And that detail comes straight from her original list, the one she recited on her father's knee, 3 years old. And she budgeted staff for her dogs. And then there were the bears. And the bears we have to handle carefully, because the bears carry a shadow. The Greeks felt something uncanny about bears. A bear can stand up. A bear has hands. Nearly. A bear's skinned body. Hunters have whispered in every century since. Looks disturbingly like a man's. Of all the animals, the bear stands closest to the human line. One small step over the border. And things that stand on borders belong to her by definition. So the bear was sacred to Artemis, and in her rites, as we will see one day at Brauron. Little girls in saffron dresses would dance as bear cubs in her honor. And it was sweet, and it was strange. But hold on to this, and hold it gently, because it is coming back. In her world, the border between girl and bear could be crossed. It had been crossed. There are sorrows in this story that wear a bear's shape. And when we meet the greatest of them, in a dark chapter not far ahead, you will remember this pool and this moonlight and the way the word bear sounded before it hurt. Not yet. Though, tonight, the kingdom is at peace, and we have one more thing to settle before we leave the water's edge, because it is the question everyone asks about her sooner or later, and it deserves a real answer. She protected the animals, and she hunted them. She was the guardian of every deer in the world, and she carried a bow, and the bow was not for decoration. How can the same hands hold both? The Greeks would have been puzzled that we even ask. They lived close to the ground, and they knew something that people who buy their meat wrapped in plastic have had the luxury of forgetting. The one who protects the herd and the one who hunts the herd have always been the same person, because they are the only person paying attention. Think of the oldest hunter you can imagine, some grandfather of the hills who has worked one valley his whole life. He knows which slope the deer winter on. He knows which doe is carrying young by the way she moves in March. He takes the old stag past his prime and passes over the yearling, hunts hard in the fat years and hangs the bow up in the lean ones. Because he is not visiting this valley. He lives here, and he plans to live here forever. And so do the deer. That man is not the opposite of a protector. He is what protection looks like when it carries a weapon. The valley has a law, and he is the law. And the deer, in their way, are safer with him in it than they would ever be without him. Now make that hunter a goddess, and give her every valley on the earth, and you have her exactly. The hunt, done rightly, was not a violation of the wild. It was the wild's own economy, the old circulation of life through life, and she was its banker and its auditor. What she never forgave, what brought the silver bow off her shoulder, was the hunter who broke the law of the valley, the man who killed a pregnant doe in the spring, the one who slaughtered past any need. For the count, for the boast, the one who put an arrow into a creature under her open protection, in a sacred grove, where even the wolves knew not to hunt. The animals never broke her law. This is the quiet truth at the bottom of the whole kingdom. In 4,000 years of stories, the offenders are never the wolves, never the bears, never the lions. Her animals were born knowing where the lines ran, the way the doe at the pool knows, the way everything wild knows what it may touch and what it may not. The trouble, every single time, walked in on two legs. There would come a day, far from tonight, when a king, standing at the head of 1,000 ships, would put an arrow into one of her deer, in one grove, and boast about the shot. And the price of that single arrow would be paid in wind, and in a girl in a wedding dress. And we will stand on that beach when the time comes. But look, the doe has finished drinking. Her head is up, the water still falling in bright drops from her muzzle, and the moon has laid itself back down on the pool, whole and unbroken. She turns, unhurried, and picks her way up the bank, and the dark between the pines takes her the way water takes a fish. Safe, tonight, in her kingdom. Everything wild is safe. Now there is one more thing to look at before the peaceful part of this story ends, and it is the thing she is holding. There is a moment inside every shot ever fired from a bow, and almost nobody has ever seen it. It lives between two sounds. The first sound is the release, the dry snap of the string coming off the fingers. The second is the strike, somewhere out in the world, a heartbeat later, and between those two sounds there is a sliver of time, thinner than a breath, in which everything has already been decided and nothing has happened yet. The arrow is in the air. The archer's part is over. The target's part has not begun. The whole universe, for one impossible instant, holds a decision in flight. She lived in that instant. If you want to understand her, really understand her, past the temples and the myths and the paintings, you stand inside that sliver of silence and you look around. Because a weapon, if you look at it honestly, is a portrait of the person who chooses it. The Greeks understood this down to their bones, and they sorted their gods accordingly. Ares carried the spear and sword, weapons of the crush and the scream, because he was the god of exactly that. Zeus held the thunderbolt, pure, overwhelming decree. Poseidon gripped the trident, the harpoon of a god who wrestles what he rules. She chose the bow before she was old enough to draw one, marched into the forge of the Cyclopes at 3 years old, past giants that made grown nymphs hide, and ordered the weapon of distance, and every property of that weapon, every single one, is a property of her. The bow works from far away. So did she. The bow requires stillness. The archer who fidgets, who breathes wrong, who lets her heart bang against her ribs at the wrong instant. Mies. The whole art is the art of becoming quiet, quieter than your own body wants to be, so quiet that the release surprises even your own fingers. She was the stillest being in the Greek imagination, the presence in the trees that even the deer could not hear. And the bow decides everything in advance. This is the deepest thing. So stay with it. A moment. A swordsman decides as he fights, parry by parry, in the boil of the moment. An archer does all her deciding before the string comes back, where the target will be, how the wind sits, whether this shot should be taken at all. Every question is asked and answered in the stillness beforehand. And then the fingers open. And from that point forward, the matter is out of everyone's hands, hers included. An arrow in flight cannot be argued with, cannot be recalled, cannot be softened mid-air. Now look back at her life with that in mind, because she lived exactly the way she shot. All her deciding was done in advance too. She decided about marriage before she could have understood a wedding, decided about the cities before she had visited one, decided the whole architecture of her existence on her father's knee, and then released it, and lived inside its flight forever after. Other gods improvised their lives, lunging and grabbing, decision by messy decision. Hers was one clean shot, aimed at age 3. There is a mercy built into a weapon like that. And the Greeks, who feared her, understood the mercy too. And this is the part of her story that surprises people. All across the ancient world, in every town, there were mornings when a woman died with no explanation. A grandmother who went to bed well and did not wake. A wife who stood up from the loom, put her hand to the door frame, and was gone before she reached the floor. No wound, no fever, no warning, no reason. The modern world has its words for those mornings. The failed heart, the quiet stroke. The Greeks had no such words. And a death with no cause is a horror the human mind cannot hold. So their poets gave those mornings a shape, and the shape was hers. When a woman died, suddenly and gently, the Greeks said Artemis had shot her. Her arrows, they said, the painless ones, the ones no one sees or hears, the goddess had drawn somewhere beyond sight and released. And the woman had crossed the last border of all, without fear and without suffering. Escorted, the way everything at every border was escorted, by the keeper of the line. Men who died that way belonged to her brother's bow. Women were hers, always hers. Hers at the first border in the birthing room, and hers at the last one. Homer himself says it more than once. The gentle death of a woman is the arrow of Artemis. Think about what that means about her. That a whole civilization, given a goddess famous for punishment, chose to believe that her arrows were the painless ones. They had watched their mothers and wives and daughters live under her keeping from the cradle onward. And when the end came out of nowhere, they told themselves the keeper had come personally, and had made it quick, and had made it kind. You do not tell that story about a monster. You tell it about a power you have decided, on the deepest level, to trust. So this was the arrangement, and now you have seen all of it. The whole peaceful architecture of her long mourning of the world, the girls at their altars, passing through her hands, the laboring women, watched over at the threshold, the animals, safe inside the law of the valleys, and over it all, the silver bow, the stillness, the distance, the perfect, unbroken terms of a contract signed on her father's knee. She released. She never missed. She was never seen. Say those 3 sentences over to yourself, because they are the 3 pillars everything rested on. And for a long age of the world, all 3 of them held. She released, and her aim stayed true. She never missed, and so her will was never once defied, and she was never seen. Not once. Not by anyone. Because the last pillar was the foundation of the other 2, her freedom. At the bottom of everything was the freedom of the unseen. Every mortal in Greece knew her name, and none of them knew her face. And that was not an accident of history. It was the first item on the list. It was the whole point of the mountains. For ages upon ages, the arrangement was perfect. The world kept to its side of every line she guarded, and she kept to hers, and the space between them stayed as clean and as silent as the space between the bowstring and the target. And then came an afternoon, an ordinary afternoon, in high summer, in a green valley called Gargaphia, where a cold spring fed a pool in a grotto of pale stone, the kind of place the noon heat could not reach. She had set her bow against the rocks. The day's hunt was over. Her nymphs were with her, and the water was cold and perfect. And for 1 hour, in the deepest privacy of her own uncrossable kingdom, the goddess, no one was allowed to see, stepped out of her tunic and into the pool, and somewhere upslope, through the trees, tired and thirsty and completely lost, a young man was walking toward the sound of the water. His name was Actaeon, and, before this afternoon, his story was a good one. He was a prince of Thebes, a grandson of the city's founder, and he had been sent as a boy into the hills of Thessaly to be raised by Chiron, the wise centaur who trained heroes in his cave among the herbs and the animals. If you have traveled with us before, you know that cave. Chiron taught the greatest healer who ever lived in that cave. He taught Achilles to run there, and he taught this boy the thing the boy loved most in the world, which was hunting. Actaeon was good at it, genuinely good, the kind of good that comes from love rather than ambition. He knew the hills around Thebes, the way you know the rooms of your own house in the dark. He kept a pack of hunting dogs, close to 50 of them by the old accounts, and he had raised every one of them from a pup, and he knew every one of them by name. The poets actually preserved the names: Tracker, Blackfoot, Whirlwind, Storm. He had named them himself. The way you name things you love. Hold on to that detail. Of everything in this chapter, that is the one to hold. The day it happened was a day in high summer, and it had been a long one. Actaeon and his companions had been hunting since first light, and by noon the heat lay on the hills like a hand, and the dogs were panting, and the men were done. Actaeon called the hunt off. "Rest now," he told his friends. "We start again at dawn." And the party turned back, and somewhere in the descent, in the folds of an unfamiliar valley, he drifted apart from the others. He was not stalking anything. He was not searching for anything. He was a tired young man in the middle of the afternoon, walking through woods he did not know, and he was thirsty. And somewhere below him, through the trees, he heard water. You know the place he was walking toward. We ended the last chapter standing at the edge of it. The valley was called Gargaphia, and at the bottom of it, cupped in pale stone, was a spring the sun never quite reached. Cold water, deep shade, a pool, the color of glass. It was hers. It had always been hers, one of the secret rooms of her enormous kingdom. And, on this afternoon, of all afternoons, she was in it. The hunt was over. Her bow was leaning against the rocks. Her nymphs were around her, and the goddess whom no living creature was permitted to see had stepped out of her tunic and into the cold water. Actaeon came down through the trees, pushing toward the sound of the spring, and moved a branch aside with one hand. That was all. That was the whole crime, if crime is even the word for it. He did not creep. He did not hide and watch. He moved a branch, and the grotto opened in front of him. And for 1 second, maybe 2, he saw what no mortal eye had ever seen. Understand what this moment was from her side of the water, because her side is the side the story turns on. Every protection she had ever built was intact. The vow, the mountains, the distance, all of it. The whole architecture ordered at 3 years old and honored by her father and defended for ages of the world. She had kept every line uncrossed for so long that the lines had stopped feeling like lines and started feeling like laws of nature. Water flows downhill. The seasons turn. Nobody sees Artemis. And then a branch moved, and a human being was looking at her. The nymphs screamed and crowded around her. But the nymphs were shorter than she was, and it was already too late. And here is the detail the poet Ovid saw so clearly that it still stings 2,000 years later. In that first instant, she did not reach for the bow. Her bow, the weapon that never missed, there was leaning against the rocks an arm's length away, and she did not reach for it. She scooped up water with her hands and threw it in his face. Feel how strange that is, and how human. It is the gesture of a startled girl, a reflex, the fastest thing her hands could do, the most feared archer in existence. Caught inside, the one moment she had spent her whole life making impossible, and what she did was splash water at it. And with the water came words, and the words tell you exactly where the wound was. "Now go," she said, "and tell people you saw me. If you can. If you can." The change began at his hairline. Antlers branching up where no weight had been a heartbeat before. His neck stretched. His ears drew upward to points and turned soft. His hands, which were braced against the rock of the grotto, lengthened, and the fingers fused. And where hands had been, there were hooves. A hide the color of a deer in shadow ran down across his body, and his heart. Somewhere inside the new architecture of his chest began to beat much too fast, because a deer's heart runs faster than a man's, and it was a deer's heart now. The old storytellers were very careful about one thing, and we will be careful about it too, because it is the entire cruelty of what happened. His mind stayed his own. Inside the deer, Actaeon was still Actaeon. He still knew his name. He still knew the way home. When he ran, and he ran without deciding to, because a deer's legs answer fear before any mind can vote. He caught his reflection in a stretch of still water and understood completely what he had become. The accounts say he groaned, and the sound came out as no human sound, and tears ran down a face that was no longer built for them. And then, from the ridgeline above, he heard the dogs, his own pack, the 50 he had raised from pups, still ranging the hills where he had left them, and they had caught a scent, and the scent was a stag. They came down the valley in full cry, doing exactly what he had spent years teaching them to do, doing it perfectly, doing it for him. He knew their voices. That is in the old accounts too, and it is nearly unbearable. He could tell the dogs apart by their baying. Blackfoot in the lead, Tracker on the flank, every voice familiar, every voice beloved, all of them closing. He tried to call to them. He tried to say, I am Actaeon, your master. You know me. What came out was the cry of a stag. His friends heard the commotion and came running, and they arrived, cheering, because the pack had cornered the biggest stag anyone had seen all season, and they called out for Actaeon, wishing he were there to see it, complaining loudly that he was missing the finest kill of the year. He heard that too. He heard his own name, called by his own friends, over the heads of his own dogs. The forest went quiet the way it does. It was over quickly. If quickly means anything from the inside of a moment like that, the goddess had finished dressing long before. The pool of Gargaphia lay flat and glassy under its shelf of stone, holding its piece of sky, and by evening the deep shade had cooled it back to perfect cold, and there was nothing anywhere in the grotto to say that anything had happened there at all. The Greeks argued about this story for centuries, and it is worth knowing that even they, who feared their gods professionally, found it hard to swallow. He did not mean to. They said to each other, it was an accident. He was lost. He was thirsty. He moved a branch. Some retellings, uncomfortable, quietly changed the story to give him more guilt, made him linger, made him boast, as if the punishment could be made to fit if the crime were just a little larger. We will not do that. We will leave it the way the oldest sorrow of the story leaves it. A tired young man made a mistake with no wrongness in his heart, and it cost him everything. And the one who set the price was not evil, and the price was still too high. Some stories refuse to hand you a villain. This is one of them, and the refusing is the point. But before we leave the valley, look one last time at her, because something happened at that pool that the poets almost never mention, and it is the reason this chapter matters to everything ahead. For the first time in the history of her existence, a line of hers had been crossed. It had been repaired within the hour. Repaired, absolutely. Sealed in the most final way possible. And yet, she had been seen. That could not be made untrue. Somewhere in the world for one afternoon there had existed a pair of eyes that held her image, and every protection her father ever granted had failed to prevent it. And she had learned something no one wants to learn about their own walls, which is that walls have a weather, and weather changes. She told herself the boundary had held. She told herself that stopping the story counted the same as it never starting. It was the first time in her life she had ever had to tell herself anything. Now I have to tell you the saddest story I know about her, and I want to start it in the good years. On a warm night, on a hillside in Arcadia, with two girls lying in the grass, counting falling stars. One of them is the goddess. The other is her favorite. Her name was Callisto, and she was the daughter of a king of Arcadia. and she had walked away from all of it. The palace, the marriage her father would have arranged, the whole indoor future laid out for a princess, to join the company that ran the mountains. She had taken the vow they all took. She had sworn what the goddess herself had sworn on her father's knee, to belong to no one, forever, and she had meant it with her whole heart. And she was good. That was the first thing everyone noticed. She could run the high ridges without breaking rhythm. She could read a hillside of stone and tell you what had crossed it since morning. Of the dozens of companions in that wild sisterhood, Callisto rose the way the best always rise, without pushing, just by being trusted with one thing after another until she stood at the front. The old accounts say the goddess loved her beyond all the others. And the Greek word they use is not a light word. So picture the good years, because the good years were real, and they were long. The company moving through the mountains in the early light, the hunts, the evenings by the fires, the dogs sprawled and steaming. 60 girls and their goddess in a country with no walls and no fathers and no futures assigned to anyone. And at the center of it, those two, the immortal and the princess, who had chosen the same freedom, lying on a summer hillside while the stars fell, easy in each other's silence. There was one detail the tradition kept, small as a grain, heavy as a mountain. When the goddess bathed, someone had to hold her bow. Think about what that object was. The silver bow from the forge of the Cyclopes, the weapon that never missed, the physical signature of everything she was. When she set it aside, she set it into one pair of hands. She gave it to Callisto. That is who Callisto was. Hold that, because everything that follows happens to that girl. The most trusted hands in the kingdom. What happened next? I am going to tell you the way the old poets told the hardest parts. From a distance, briefly, without lingering, Zeus saw her, the king of the gods, her goddess's own father, the one who had signed the charter of all their freedom, looked down from wherever he was looking and wanted what he saw. And Zeus, when he wanted, did not court, and did not ask, and had never once heard no in his immortal life, and did not intend to start. But Callisto was careful. All the companions were careful. They kept to the deep country. They kept together. They trusted nothing strange. So he came to her when she was alone and resting. And he came in a borrowed shape. And of every shape in the universe he could have chosen, he chose the one shape on earth that would make that girl put down her guard completely. He came to her looking like Artemis. She saw her goddess walking toward her across the grass, and she smiled, and she stood up to greet her. Everything in her that watched the world, every instinct sharpened by years in the wild, all of it stood down at once, gladly, the way you stand down for the one person you trust with your whole life. By the time she understood, it was too late to matter. He left the way he always left, and she stayed behind on the grass of her own beloved mountains. And the thing that had been done to her could not be undone, and she could not tell anyone, because what had been done had also left her carrying a child. And a child, under the law of the sisterhood, meant the vow was broken. Say that part plainly, because the whole tragedy lives inside it. The vow was a wall built to keep exactly this out, and the wall had failed her completely. And now the wall itself was going to be her accuser. So she hid it. For months she hid it. And the accounts let you feel the loneliness of those months if you read them slowly. She went quiet. She kept to the edge of the company she had once led. She invented reasons to hang back, to bathe alone, to sleep apart. This girl who had lived her whole adult life shoulder to shoulder with her sisters, and none of them could reach whatever had gone wrong in her. And the one being she had always taken her troubles to was the one being she could never, ever tell. It ended on a day of heat, at a cold spring, in a scene that is almost a mirror of the one in the last chapter, and the mirror is not an accident. The hunt was over. The goddess called the company to bathe. Everyone began to undress. Easily, thoughtlessly. Sisters in the water they had shared for years. Callisto stood at the edge and did not move. They teased her first. The accounts say, then they stopped teasing, and in the end it was not confession, and it was not discovery by cleverness. Her sisters, laughing, pulled the tunic from her themselves, and the laughing died. And there she stood in the ordinary daylight, and everything hidden was hidden no longer, and the whole company saw, and the goddess saw. The spring went very quiet, and now we come to it, the hardest passage in her entire 4,000 years, and I am not going to soften it, and I am not going to explain it away, because this story only means something if it is allowed to be exactly what it is. Artemis looked at her most trusted friend, standing exposed and trembling at the edge of the water, and what she saw was not a wound. She saw a broken vow. The law of the company was the oldest law she had, older than the company itself, carved at 3 years old into the granite of her father's promise. And the law knew nothing about mercy, because it had never needed to, in all the ages of the world. No one had ever broken it. Go, she said. Leave this company. Do not pollute this spring. That was all. No thunder. A handful of words, and the girl who had held her bow gathered what she could carry and walked out of the only family she had chosen, out of the mountains, out of the story of her own life, alone, carrying the child of the god who had ended it, wearing the guilt that belonged entirely to him. The goddess of protection had met the one wound her kingdom was built to prevent, and she had punished the wounded. Did she know? The poets went back and forth on it for centuries. Some say she never learned whose doing it was. Some say she knew and it changed nothing. Because a vow is a vow. Because law was the only architecture holding her whole world up. And if the law bent for a victim, it might bend for anything. I think the honest answer is the worst one. I think she was very young in the one way that mattered. She had never been forced. She had never been overpowered. Her father had made her untouchable at 3 years old. And a being who has never once been helpless can look straight at helplessness and see only choices. Her certainty was not cruelty. It was innocence. The terrible kind. The kind power gets to keep. The rest, Callisto bore alone. The child came, a boy, and she named him Arcas, and then Hera, the queen of the sky, who could never punish her husband, and so spent eternity punishing the women he ruined, came down to finish what the family had started. And where Hera's hand fell, Callisto's body left her. She dropped forward onto hands that thickened into paws. Dark fur ran over her. Her voice, when she tried to cry out, came back to her as a growl. A bear. You remember, from the quiet chapter by the pool, what bears meant in this story. The animal one step from the human line, the sacred beast of Artemis herself. Hera did not choose that shape by accident. It was mockery, aimed at the goddess as much as the girl. Here is your beloved. I have dressed her in your own colors. And her mind stayed. You knew that was coming, because you heard what happened to Actaeon. And this story is that story, with the mercy removed. Actaeon suffered for an hour. Callisto lived. For years she wandered the forests of Arcadia inside the body of a bear, remembering everything. A princess, a huntress, a mother, hiding from the hunters because she remembered what hunters do, hiding from the wolves because she was afraid of wolves, afraid of animals while being one, sleeping in the cold, outside a world that had no place left where she fit. Her son grew up without her, Arcas, raised by strangers, became what everyone in this story becomes. A hunter, 15 years old, the accounts say, and one day, deep in the woods with a spear in his hand, he came face to face with a bear that did not run. She knew him. Of course she knew him. 15 years, and she knew him instantly, the way mothers know, and everything left in her that was still Callisto surged up and moved her toward her boy. He saw a bear charging, and set his feet, and raised the spear. And Zeus, of all beings, Zeus, who had caused every link of this chain, chose that instant to finally act. Maybe it was guilt. If he could carry guilt, maybe he simply could not watch the ending he had authored. He reached down and took them both, the bear and the boy, an instant before the spear went home, and he swung them up into the night sky and set them among the stars, the great bear, and beside her the little bear, her son, close to her at last, forever, in the one country where nothing can be hurt anymore. People call it kindness. Look closer, the way the Greeks looked, and you will see the last cruelty stitched into it. Because Hera was not finished, the Queen of Heaven went to the ancient powers of the sea and asked one favor: never let that constellation rest. Every other star that turns through the sky gets to set, to sink below the horizon and bathe in the ocean and rise clean. Hers never would, and it never has. Go outside tonight, wherever you are, and if your sky is northern, the great bear is there. It is always there. It wheels around the pole star through every hour of every night of every year, and it never touches the sea, and it never goes down, and it never, ever rests. The goddess learned all of it, in time, what her father had done, and in whose shape he had done it, what Hera had done, what the law had done, her law, in her voice, at the edge of that spring. She never changed the law. That is true, and it stayed true forever, and you should sit with how true it is. But the tradition remembers no certainty in her ever again either. Not the old kind, the granite kind, and it remembers this, on clear nights, on the high ridges of Arcadia, where two girls once lay in the summer grass, counting falling stars. The goddess would stop sometimes, alone now, and look up. The stars her friend had counted, her friend had joined, low in the north, circling, never setting, never resting, always exactly where the goddess could see her, never once, in all the ages since, where she could reach. There is a rooftop in the city of Thebes, the flat stone roof of a temple overlooking the main square. And on the morning this chapter happens, someone is standing on it with a bow. We will climb up there in a moment, but first you need to hear what was said in the square below, and to understand why it mattered. You need to remember an old woman who was young once, walking on the sea. Leto, the mother. You met her in the dark at the beginning of everything, crossing the water with two lives inside her and every door on earth locked against her, holding a palm tree on a drifting island because one goddess's jealousy had made the whole world a wall. Her children never forgot that story. They could not forget it. One of them had watched it happen from the inside, minutes old, eyes open. And so, among all the lines the twins guarded, there was one line they never discussed, never negotiated, and never marked with a warning. Their mother. You could climb their mountains by accident. You could stumble into their groves. Mortals had survived carelessness before, here and there, in the merciful versions of certain stories. Nobody survived Leto. The woman who found this out was named Niobe, and she was the queen of Thebes. And the terrible thing about her, The thing that makes her story hurt the way it hurts is that her crime was made out of love. She had 14 children, 7 sons and 7 daughters, and they were healthy, and they were beautiful. And if you have ever watched a parent look at a child and visibly fill up with pride, you have seen Niobe's whole soul. She counted them the way rich men count gold, often and openly, and with pleasure. 14. In a world where children died, young and often, she had 14, all alive, all thriving, and she walked through her city like a woman who had personally beaten fate. The day it broke, the women of Thebes were holding a festival for Leto, incense in the streets, laurel branch, prayers going up to the mother of the twins, and Niobe came out of her palace and looked at all that devotion flowing toward a goddess, and something in her, some overfilled place where the pride had been rising for years, finally went over the rim. Why her? She asked the crowd. Why do you worship that woman? Leto had 2 children. 2. I have 14. Count them. 7 times what the goddess managed. If motherhood is what you are honoring today, you are burning incense at the wrong door. Put down the laurel. She told them, go home. And some of them, because she was the queen, put down the laurel. The words were in the air now. Words travel upward in that world. All of them. Every boast spoken in every square. And these words rose from the stones of Thebes into the high cold where the twins lived. And they landed. What happened next happened fast. And the old accounts are strangely unanimous about the speed. There was no council on Olympus. There was no warning sent. No oracle. No chance offered. Later ages would soften almost every story they retold. And nobody ever found a way to soften this one. The twins heard. And the twins stood up. And the twins took their bows. And it is recorded nowhere that either of them said a single word to the other. They had been reading each other's silences since Delos. This silence read itself. Her brother took the sons. They were out on the plain below the city walls. The 7 of them, exercising their horses in the morning sun. And his arrows came out of the empty sky, one after another. And you may have heard that part of the story before, told from the height of the sun's own road, the plain. Then, from far above, 7 riders. Then 6. Then 5. This time we are not far above. This time we climb to the temple roof, into the shadow of the parapet, where the sister has taken her position, overlooking the square, because the daughters were not out on the plain. The daughters were in the city, in the middle of everything. And when the news of their brothers came screaming in from the gates, they did what daughters do. They ran to their mother. Look down from the rooftop now. See what she sees. 7 girls in the square below, clustering around Niobe, holding her up as she begins to understand what is arriving in her life. 7 girls. And here is the thing I need you to see clearly. The thing this whole chapter exists to say. Look at their ages. The eldest is a young woman, nearly ready for a wedding that will never happen now. The younger ones are children. These are girls in the exact green country she owns. Girls of the altars and the dolls and the saffron dances. Girls who in any other city, on any other morning, would be under her protection so completely that harming one of them would bring the silver bow to their defense. The silver bow is here. It is pointed at them. She drew, and she released, and she never missed. I will not walk you arrow by arrow through what happened in that square, because the oldest tellers didn't either. And they were right. What they preserved instead was a shape, and the shape is this. The daughters fell one at a time, and Niobe, understanding at last, tried to shield the youngest with her own body, wrapped herself around the smallest girl, and looked up at the empty rooftops, and begged. "Leave me one," she said. "The littlest one. Leave me one." The account says the last arrow was already in the air. Afterward, the silence. You have heard about this silence before. The specific silence of Thebes on that specific morning. The silence that soaked into the stones. Niobe stood in the middle of it, in the middle of everything she had counted. And she did not scream. And she did not fall. She simply stopped. Grief that size does not move. The stories say the change crept over her, where she stood, her body slowly going, the color of stone. Then the weight of stone. Then stone. A woman turned monument in the town square, and a great wind eventually carried the stone away to a mountainside in Lydia, in the east, where it stands to this day. There is a real cliff face there. Travelers wrote about it for centuries. A rock formation with water seeping from it endlessly, streaking the stone like a face that cannot stop. The weeping rock, Niobe, still counting. Her brother flew home when it was done, back to the sun's road, carrying what he carried. We followed him once, in another story, and we saw what the carrying cost him, added to everything else he was already hauling across the sky each morning. But the sister, what did the sister carry? She had done nothing outside her law. Understand that first. Defending Leto was the deepest clause in the family charter, and Niobe had not stumbled into anything, had not gotten lost, had not moved a branch by accident. She had stood in a public square and demanded that a city stop worshipping the woman who once gave birth alone on a rock because the world had abandoned her. Of everyone in these stories who crossed a line, Niobe drew hers on purpose, with her own hand, in ink, and still, 7 arrows, and every one of them found a girl. She never spoke of it. There is no account, anywhere, of Artemis mentioning Thebes for the rest of time, but the tradition kept one small, strange detail, and I have saved it for last because I think it is the closest thing to a confession she ever left behind. Her wanderings, in the long ages afterward, sometimes took her east, through Lydia, through the very hills where the weeping rock stands. The locals said so. It was her country. After all, every mountain on earth was her country. She never stopped there. The stories are clear. She passed through Lydia, and she did not stop, and she did not look. And if you have ever driven a long way around a place you could not bear to see again, you know exactly what that means. And you know it is not the same as forgetting. The rock weeps on the mountainside. The water finds its way down, and the goddess passes at a distance, the way she did everything, and keeps going. Every story I have told you about her so far has one thing in common, and you may have noticed it without noticing. The way you sense a room is missing a window before you can say what is wrong. In every scene of her long life, she is either alone or she is in front. Alone on the rooftop at Thebes, alone at the pool, in front of the company in the mountains, first through the trees, first to the ridgeline, the 60 companions always a step behind, because that was the arrangement, that was the whole shape of her, even with her brother, the one soul who asked nothing of her. They stood back to back, facing opposite worlds. Side by side appears nowhere. Go look. 4,000 years of stories, and nobody walks beside her. Then one morning on the island of Crete, somebody did. His name was Orion, and everything about him was slightly too large for the world. He was a giant, though not the monstrous kind. The old accounts are careful about that. A giant, the way some men are, simply built past the usual scale. tall enough that when he waded out to sea, the poet swore the water only reached his shoulders. His father was Poseidon, and his father's gift ran in him strangely and beautifully. Orion could walk on the sea, not sail on it, walk on it, striding from island to island across the open water the way other men cross a field. And he was a hunter, not a prince who hunted, not a king with a good pack and better luck. A hunter the way she was a hunter, down at the root, in the grain of him. It was not what he did. It was what he was. The stories put them together on Crete, in the high country, and they never quite explained the beginning. And I think that is because there was nothing to explain. Two hunters working the same mountains will cross paths. It is only a question of when. What the stories do preserve is what happened after they crossed. And what happened is the thing that had never happened before. He kept up. Feel how enormous that small sentence is. Nobody kept up with her. Keeping up with her was not a thing that occurred in the universe. Her own companions, immortal nymphs, bred to the wild, ran behind her. And here was this oversized son of the sea moving through her mountains at her pace, reading the ground as fast as she read it, going quiet when the wind shifted a half-breath after she did, and never once, not one single time, treating any of it as a performance for her benefit. That was the key that fit the lock, and I want to stop on it, because this is the very center of her whole story. Every defense she had ever built was designed against wanting, against the reaching hand, the claiming eye, the world of suitors and takers. Her mother's life had warned her about before she was an hour old. Her walls were engineered, precisely and perfectly, to stop desire. Orion did not want anything from her. He did not court her. In the oldest, cleanest layer of the story, there is no romance in him at all. No reaching, no glances held too long. He wanted exactly what she wanted, which was the next ridgeline, the morning wind, the work. When they hunted, he took the low path without being told and drove the game up toward her bow, or she flushed the boar down onto his spear. And either way, the credit interested neither of them. He was, as far as the record shows, the first and only being in existence who was simply glad to be in the same country she was in, asking nothing. Her walls had no instructions for that. Walls stop what pushes against them. He never pushed. And so, without one stone being lowered, without a single term of the ancient list being renegotiated, he ended up on the inside. And I do not think she ever consciously decided to allow it. I think she looked over one morning, on some high trail on Crete with the sea shining through the pines below, and discovered that she was walking beside someone, in step, matched, accompanied, for the first time since the beginning of the world, and she found she did not mind. The companions noticed. Of course they noticed. 60 pairs of eyes missed nothing. Their goddess laughed more that season. The old traditions hint. The hunts ran longer. The fires burned later. However, you build the details in your mind. Build them warm, because the story requires you to know that this was real, and that it was good, and that of all the seasons in her 4,000 years, this one, on Crete, with a big, easy hunter who wanted nothing, may have been the only stretch of her existence when the distance she had chosen at 3 years old simply did not weigh anything at all. Now, here is where I have to be honest with you, the way this story has been honest all night, because the ending exists in several versions, and the old world never settled on one. Some said Orion grew too proud, and boasted he would hunt down every animal on the face of the earth, and the earth herself sent a great scorpion up out of the ground to stop him. Some said he reached for one of the companions, or worse, and paid what her law demanded. The Greeks told all these versions, And if you love this story, you should know they exist. But there is one version, older and sadder than the rest. And it is the one where nothing goes wrong between them at all. It is the one where the danger was never Orion. It was how he was changing her. Because someone else was watching that season on Crete. Her twin had known her since before either of them was an hour old. He had watched her build the walls, item by item, on their father's knee. And now, from the road of the sun, he watched his sister walking beside a mortal man, matched and easy and unguarded, and something in him tightened. The accounts never tell us his reason, and after everything you have heard tonight, you know better than to expect a simple one. Call it jealousy, and you have probably said too little. He had lost every mortal he had ever let close, and had carried each one home as a flower, or a tree, or a regret. And maybe he could already see the same road opening under his sister's feet. Maybe he thought of Callisto, and what nearness had cost her. Maybe he told himself he was protecting the vow. Brothers have burned down their sister's happiness with worse intentions and with better ones. And the sun rose on schedule either way. What he did with words, which had always been his weapon before the bow. He came to her on the shore of Crete, one bright day with a hard wind, while Orion was far out in the water, doing the thing only Orion could do, walking the deep sea with the waves at his shoulders, so far from land that he was nothing on the horizon. A fleck, a dark point, lifting and dropping among the whitecaps. And her brother looked out at that distant speck, and then he looked at his sister, and he smiled the way siblings smile before the knife of a joke, and he said something like this: "You are called the Great Archer. They say you never miss, but even you could never hit that little dark mark, out there, riding the swells. That is beyond anybody's bow. You already know. I can feel that you already know." But she did not. She was a god, and gods have their pride stitched into their power, and more than pride. She trusted him. This was the one being in existence she had never once needed to guard against. Her twin, her mirror, the other bow. The wind was hard, and the distance was absurd, and the challenge lit her up, the way impossible shots had lit her up since the forge of the Cyclopes. She drew, silver limbs, the string to her cheek, the whole apparatus of her stillness settling around her. That stillness we stood inside together, chapters ago, the quiet between the two sounds. She released. She never missed. The dark speck on the water stopped moving. I am not going to try to build the moment she understood. Some doors a storyteller should not walk through, only point to. The old accounts say the waves brought him in to the beach themselves, which is a strange mercy, until you remember whose son he was. The sea carried Orion home to Crete and laid him on the sand, and the greatest archer in existence stood over the one shot she would have given her immortality to call back out of the air. And here, at last, the two stories, hers and her brother's, close like two hands, somewhere in another telling, on another beautiful morning. Apollo knelt in the grass of Sparta, holding Hyacinthus, the god of healing, unable to heal. Now his sister stood on a beach in Crete, holding what her own perfection had done. His curse had been reaching and never touching. Hers was aiming and never missing. All their lives those had looked like opposite fates. On the sand, that day, they turned out to be the same fate, wearing two faces, the way the twins themselves were, one grief wearing two faces, and neither of them ever said so out loud. Because what would be the point? She did not curse her brother. Mark that. There is no version, not one, in which she raged at him, or struck at him, or spoke of it at all. What settled between the twins was worse than rage, and you have known it in your own family. If your family has ever truly broken something, the meetings at Delos continued, down the ages, brother and sister on the pale beach where they were born, and the silence between them, which had always been the warm kind, the kind that needs no arranging, was a different silence now, and they both knew it, and they met anyway, forever, because that is what twins do with the unforgivable. They carry it together, at a distance, in the family way. Orion, she carried differently. She would not give him to the ground. The ground was too small for him, and too dark, and too far from the work, so she lifted him past it, the whole length of him, into the winter sky. And if you have ever looked up on a cold, clear night, you have seen exactly what she made. The mightiest constellation there is, 3 bright stars for his belt, the unmistakable line of them, and the broad shoulders above, and at his heel, because she thought of everything. She set the dog star, Sirius, the brightest star in the entire sky, so that he would never hunt alone. And then she did the thing that tells you everything about how gods grieve. She timed him. Orion rises in the evening sky as the old hunting season begins, when the air sharpens and the game moves down from the high country. All winter he hangs overhead, out with her, working the long dark, and in the spring, when the season closes and the wild things bear their young under her protection, and every bough in her kingdom goes quiet, Orion sinks below the western horizon, and is gone. Every autumn he comes back to her. Every spring he leaves. She built the goodbye into the sky itself, on an annual schedule, permanent, punctual, endurable. It was the only way she knew how to keep anything. This goddess of the country everyone passes through, even her greatest love, became a season. He is up there tonight. If the month is right where you are, look for the 3 stars in a row. Every hunter who ever lived has found the sky by them. And somewhere below them, on the dark side of every ridgeline, the one who put them there is still working the long winter, with the bright dog at heel, and a hunter overhead, keeping up. 1,000 ships. Try to hold that number in your mind for a moment, because the Greeks themselves could barely hold it. 1,000 ships, gathered in one bay, on the eastern coast of Greece, at a place called Aulis, the greatest fleet the ancient world had ever assembled, drawn from every kingdom, every island, every proud walled city with a king and a grudge. They had come to sail against Troy. 10 years of war waited on the far side of the water, and a burning city, and the deaths of heroes whose names would outlive every kingdom on that beach. And none of it could begin, because the wind had stopped. Picture the bay at Aulis in the 3rd week of the stillness. 1,000 masts standing bare against the sky, sails hanging like laundry on a dead afternoon, the water flat as poured metal. Day after day after day, and 40,000 men camped along the shore with nothing to do but eat through their supplies and sharpen their tempers. No storm had trapped them, a storm they could have understood, waited out, prayed against. This was worse than any storm. This was nothing. The air itself had simply quit, as if the world had been paused by a hand nobody could see. And the great war of the age sat rotting on a beach because the weather refused to happen. The soldiers knew, the way soldiers always know, that this was not weather. Somebody had done something. The seer was named Calchas, and when the kings finally summoned him and demanded an answer, he was afraid to give it. And he was right to be afraid, because the answer ran straight to the top. The offense belonged to Agamemnon, the High King himself, the commander of the entire fleet, the man the 1,000 ships were waiting on. You have already heard the crime, or the edge of it, back on a quiet night by a moonlit pool, When we talked about the law of the valleys, some say it happened right there at Aulis, in the idle days. When the king went hunting to pass the time, he saw a deer in a grove, a beautiful one, and he took the shot, and the shot was clean. And as the animal fell, he said, the thing that hunters must never say. He boasted, Artemis herself, he said, could not have shot better. The deer was in her grove, under her open protection, on sacred ground, where even the wolves knew not to hunt. You know her arithmetic by now. A line was crossed, on purpose, with a boast attached, by a king. And so she did the thing that, of everything in her long story, may be the purest demonstration of what she actually was. She did not strike the fleet. She did not send plague or fire or a monster from the sea. She turned off the wind. Feel the scale of that for a second. Her brother's punishments arrived as arrows out of the sky. Hers arrived as an absence. The greatest military force in the history of the world. 40,000 spears. 1,000 hulls. Kings and heroes and demigods. All of it held motionless by a goddess who had simply withdrawn something, the way you might take a toy from a child, without anger, without effort, without even appearing. Nobody saw Artemis at Aulis. Nobody ever saw Artemis. The stillness was her presence. The flat water was her voice. And then Calchas told them her price. And the story goes dark. The wind would return. The seer said, on one condition, Agamemnon must give back what he took, a life from under her protection for a life from under her protection, and the life she named was the king's own eldest daughter, Iphigenia. She was at home in Mycenae, far from the coast, and she was perhaps 15 years old. Remember, 15. You have stood in a lamplit room with a girl of 15 before, in this very story. A girl sorting her dolls on the last night of her childhood. Iphigenia was that girl, at exactly that border, still on the near side of it, still in the green country, still, by every law of heaven, one of the daughters of Artemis. Her father sent for her with a lie, and the lie is the cruelest object in this entire chapter. He wrote to her mother that a marriage had been arranged, the finest match in the world, no less. Iphigenia was to come to Aulis and be wed to Achilles, the greatest of the heroes, the son of a goddess, the shining name of the whole fleet. Come quickly, the letter said, bring the wedding garments. And so she came to that beach, believing she was a bride, dressed as a bride, veiled as a bride. A girl arriving at the very border crossing we watched together, the one every Greek girl crossed with her dolls and her cut lock of hair, the one her goddess personally attended. The camp turned out to watch her pass, 40,000 men who knew exactly what she was walking toward, and she walked through them glowing, looking for her husband. There was an altar at the end of the walk. There was no husband. I will not stretch this scene, and the oldest tellers did not stretch it either. Some of them, in fact, wrote that at the last moment her father could not look, that he turned his face away and wept into his robe, and that she understood everything in the space of one breath. The letter, the dress, the silence of the men. The accounts give her words at the altar, and the words are not a warrior's words, because she was not a warrior. She was 15. She begged. She reminded her father that she was the first child ever to call him Papa, that she used to sit on his knee. On his knee. I know. The old poets knew exactly what they were doing, and the priest raised the knife over the daughter of the king, over the girl in the wedding dress, over the child of the exact country that the offended goddess had spent 4,000 years guarding. And every man on that beach looked away, and the knife came down, and met nothing. Here is the moment, told the way the poet Euripides told it, the version the ancient world loved best because it was the only version anyone could bear. Between the fall of the blade and the touch of it, in a sliver of time, thinner than the space between a bowstring's two sounds, the girl was gone, not harmed, not hidden, gone, as though the air had opened, and on the altar, in her place, appearing in the same impossible instant, was a deer for a deer, her price, paid in her own coin, collected in her own way. The priest stared, the kings stared, and then the sails, 1,000 of them, all along the bay, began to stir. The wind came back the way tide comes back, everywhere at once, as if it had never been anywhere else. And the fleet that would burn Troy began to move, and the age of heroes rolled forward over the water, and in all the shouting and the running and the hauling of lines, it took a long time for anyone to ask the question you are asking right now. Where did the girl go? Far to the north and east. The old accounts say, to the cold coast of a land called Tauris, at the wild edge of the known world, farther from home than any Greek girl had ever been. The goddess had lifted her out of the knife's path and carried her there in the space of a heartbeat, and set her down, alive, whole, and breathing sea air on a shore her father's maps did not reach. And there Artemis made her a priestess, her own priestess, in her own temple, at the edge of everything, under her protection, now not for a season, not until some wedding, but for good. I want to be careful here, because this is the one chapter of her story with light in it, and light deserves the same honesty we have given the dark. So let us say plainly what she did and did not do. She did not save the war. The ships sailed. Troy burned. 10 years later, with everything that burning meant. And some of you have stood in the smoke of that ending with me before, in another story, watching it from the walls. She did not soften Agamemnon, whose road home from Troy would end in his own bathwater, in his own blood, at the hands of a wife who had never forgiven Aulis. And who can blame her? She did not repair the family, or spare the fleet, or bend the great grinding wheel of that age 1 degree from its course. The wheel was never hers. The wars of kings belonged to other gods, and she had never once pretended otherwise. She saved the girl, the one person on that entire beach who stood inside her territory, the one life on the whole board that her ancient job description covered. 40,000 men sailed to a war, and a goddess reached into the middle of them and took back the single 15-year-old, and left the rest of history exactly where it stood. After everything you have heard tonight, after Callisto, after the square at Thebes, after the beach at Crete, you know how much it matters that this story exists. It is the proof, kept safe in the record for 3,000 years, that the border ever worked the way it was supposed to work. A girl walked up to the last line of her life, and the keeper of the line was there. And this one time, the keeper caught her. Hold on to Aulis. Keep it lit. You will want it for what comes next. Because there was one border in the world that did not belong to her. One threshold in all of existence where her protection stopped at the door, and it was waiting for her, patient as everything else in her kingdom, on a rocky shore south of Athens. In the last great story of her age, she was about to lose someone she was standing right next to, and this time there would be no deer. In the little kingdom of Troezen, across the water from Athens, there lived a young man who talked to a goddess every day of his life and never once saw her face. His name was Hippolytus, and he was a prince, the son of the great hero Theseus, and by every measure of that world He should have grown up hungry for the usual things. Chariots, glory, a famous marriage, a name to shake the earth. He wanted none of it. What Hippolytus loved, from boyhood, with his whole undivided heart, was the wild. He kept a meadow for her. That detail is real, preserved in the old play that carries his name, and it may be the gentlest image in all of Greek religion. An untouched meadow, sacred to Artemis, where no shepherd had ever driven flocks and no blade had ever cut, where the grass grew as it pleased and the bees worked it all summer, and only he was permitted to gather flowers there, because only he came to it clean. He would braid them into garlands for her statue and lay them at her feet and speak to her, easily, familiarly, the way you speak to family. And she answered, "Understand." What a staggering thing that was. The goddess whom no mortal was permitted to see, the presence in the trees, the stillness itself, spoke with this boy. He heard her voice in the meadow and in the hunt, a companion's voice, close at hand, and they passed whole days that way, hunting the hills of Trozen together, the goddess and the young man, her hounds around them both. He never saw her, not once, in his whole life. He heard the voice and never asked for more, never begged for one glimpse, never crept toward any pool of every mortal in 4,000 years of stories. He alone was handed nearness to her, and he alone never reached. You remember the young man who saw her without wanting to. Here was his opposite, his mirror, the one who could have wanted to and never looked. Between those two mortals, the accidental eye and the faithful blindness, you can draw the entire map of her. She loved him for it. The old play says so outright, says he was dearest to her of all mortals. And after the beach at Crete, you know how much that word cost her, and how carefully she must have spent it. But there was a flaw in Hippolytus, and it was the same substance as his virtue. The way flaws so often are. He had given everything to one goddess, all his worship, all his heart, the entire meadow of himself, fenced and sacred and reserved. And the Greek sky does not work that way. The sky is a family, crowded and jealous, and every one of them is owed a portion, and the portion Hippolytus refused to pay was the one belonging to the goddess of love, Aphrodite. He would not bow to her, would not burn so much as a pinch of incense at her altar. He said so, out, loud, more than once, with the serene rudeness of the very pure. Love, desire, marriage, the whole department. He wanted nothing from it, and he said he wanted nothing from it. And Aphrodite heard, because they always hear. She destroyed him with other people's hearts. That was her craft, after all, and the machine she built was flawless. And I will walk you through it quickly and quietly, the way you pass a bad accident, because the details are not where our story lives. She reached into the heart of his stepmother, Phaedra, the young wife of Theseus, and set it burning with a love the woman never chose and could not extinguish. Phaedra fought it in silence until the silence broke her, and when the secret finally tore loose into the world, shame swallowed her, and she died by her own hand, and she left behind a letter, and the letter lied. It named Hippolytus. It said the son had done to the father's wife the thing that, of all things on earth, this particular young man was least capable of doing. Theseus came home to a dead wife and a written accusation, and he did not investigate, and he did not wait, and he did not ask his son a single question with his anger cooled. He had banked away from his own famous adventures. 3 curses granted to him by his father Poseidon, god of the sea, 3 wishes that could not fail, In his grief and his rage, he spent one on his own child. Hippolytus left Troezen in exile that same day, swearing his innocence to a father who would not hear it, and he took the coast road north, driving his own chariot, the horses he had raised himself, and he was still in sight of the city when Poseidon paid the debt. A wave stood up out of a calm sea. Out of the wave came a bull, enormous, impossible, bellowing, and the horses went insane with fear. The chariot ran, flipped, shattered along the rocks, and the young man, tangled in the reins, was dragged, and by the time the horses spent themselves, he was lying broken on the shore, alive, and only barely, and only for a little while. They carried him back toward the city, and the truth came out behind him. Too late, the way truth prefers, and Theseus stood over the dying son he had cursed, understanding at last and completely what he had done, and the room filled with the particular silence that surrounds an error that has no repair. And then she came. This is the scene, out of the old play by Euripides, that I have been carrying toward you all night, through every chapter, because in all the centuries of everything ever written about Artemis, this is the only time we hear her speak at length in her own voice, present, in a room, to people she can see, and the first thing that voice does is tell the truth. She names Aphrodite. She lays out the whole machine, the false letter, the poisoned heart, the wasted curse, so that the dying boy will not go out of the world believing his father hated him rightly, and so the father will know exactly what he spent his wish on. She gives them the one thing she had always been the goddess of, the clean line, the truth of where everything actually stood, and the boy on the litter, hearing that voice above him for the last time, the voice he had hunted beside his whole life, says the words that break the heart of every audience that has heard this play for 24 centuries. He says he knows her. He says, "You are here," and she stays by him, and she promises him what gods can promise, that his name will not die, that in Troezen, forever, the girls on the eve of their weddings will cut their hair for him, will bring him their mourning and their songs before every bridal morning, so that his story will be woven into that border crossing for as long as the border exists. You know that ritual. You stood beside it at the very start of the night, in the lamplight, watching a girl fold away her childhood. He is inside that ritual now. He has been inside it this whole time, and now you know why. But the boy is going. The breath is running out of him, and what he wants, what anyone wants at that hour, is not a legacy. It is for her to stay. And now listen, because here it comes. The sentence that this entire chapter exists for, the oldest law in her long life of laws. She cannot stay. It was forbidden, deep in the oldest grain of the Greek sky, for the deathless to look upon death. A god's eyes could not rest on a mortal's dying. The play states it plainly, in her own mouth. It is not permitted for me to look upon the dead, she tells him, or to darken my eyes with the last breath of the dying. And so, in the very room, at the very hour, beside the mortal she loved most in all the world, the goddess of every threshold arrived at a threshold that was closed to her. Think of everything she was. The keeper of the birthing room door, present at the first border of every life, the escort of the gentle arrow, mistress of the last border, the one who carried women across it kindly in the dark. Every edge in existence was her country, except this one, the actual moment of crossing, the doorway itself, the room inside the room. Mortals pass through it alone, all of them, always, and the deathless stood outside, all of them, always, and no exception had ever been made, and none was made now. She said goodbye to him while he could still hear it. The play gives them their farewell, and it is brief, and it is tender. And then, before the end came, before his eyes changed, she did the only thing her nature allowed her to do. She turned away. The stage direction has survived 2,400 years. She withdraws, and the boy dies in his weeping father's arms. In a room she has just left, and the last loss of her great age happens at her back, on the far side of the one line in the universe that she could not hold, could not guard, and could not cross. She had spent her whole existence choosing the distance, every wall, every mountain, every mile of it, chosen, item by item, from her father's knee onward. This distance she did not choose. It chose her. It had been standing quietly inside her immortality the entire time, waiting at the bottom of everything, like bedrock under a kingdom. The last term of a contract she signed at 3 years old without ever reading it. She would keep, she would guard, she would attend, and escort, and watch over, forever, and everything she watched over would, in the end, go through a door she could not follow. The girls into their marriages, the companions into their stars, the hunters into the winter sky, and the faithful of Trozen into the dark, while the goddess stood in the doorway with her back turned, listening. The myths grow quiet after Trozen. That is simply true. The heroic age was ending. The ships were coming home from Troy to their ruined households, and the great stories of gods walking beside mortals were passing out of the world. But her story does not end there, not even close, because the humans were not finished with her. Down in the towns, in the ordinary daylight, far from any myth, they were about to start building her rooms of their own, and they filled those rooms with little girls in yellow dresses, dancing. They danced as bears. Leave the myths behind now. Close the door on the age of heroes. Gently, the way you close the door on a sleeping child, and come forward in time, into the ordinary world. It is a spring evening in the 5th century before the Common Era, and we are standing in the countryside of Attica, a few hours' walk east of Athens, near a slow, small river and a marsh where the herons feed. There is a sanctuary here, low stone buildings, a temple, a spring, a courtyard with a colonnade catching the last of the light. The place is called Brauron. Real travelers wrote about it. Real archaeologists have walked you and me through its ruins. This is not myth country anymore. This is history, with its feet in the mud of an actual riverbank, and across the courtyard, in the honey-colored light of evening, little girls are dancing. There are perhaps 24 of them, and they are young, 5 years old, 7, 9, 10 at the very oldest. They wear dresses dyed a deep saffron yellow, the color of crocus petals, the color of flame, if flame were soft. And the dance they are dancing is not like any dance you have seen, because the girls are moving slowly, deliberately, with their hands curled and their steps heavy and rolling. They are pretending to be bears. Little bears. That was the actual name of it. The Athenians called these girls Arctoi, the bears, and the ritual was called the Actaeon, the bear ceremony. And for a girl of Athens, it was one of the great appointments of childhood, before a daughter could grow up, before she could ever stand at that lamplit border with her dolls and her wedding on the horizon. Custom asked that she first come out here, to the marsh and the river and the goddess, and spend a season at the sanctuary, and dance as a bear for Artemis. Historians have puzzled over the details for centuries, and the honest truth is that nobody alive knows exactly how it all worked. What survives is enough to see the shape. The girls lived at the sanctuary for a time, away from their families, the way their goddess had always lived away. They ran races, they carried baskets in processions, they danced the slow bear dance in their saffron dresses, and at some point in the rite, one account says, they shed the saffron dress itself. The way a wild thing sheds what it has outgrown, and when the season was done, they went home to Athens, and grew up, and married, and told their own daughters that one day they too would go to Brauron and be bears. Now, why bears? The Athenians had a story they told about it, an official one, about a tame bear at the sanctuary long ago, a girl who teased it, a scratch, brothers who killed the bear, and a plague that followed, and an oracle that commanded Athens to pay for the bear's death forever by dedicating its daughters as bears in its place. That was the story fathers told. It is a fine story, but you have been with me all night. You know another one. You were on a hillside in Arcadia when the goddess's most beloved companion lay in the summer grass counting falling stars. You watched what Zeus did to her, and what the law did to her after, and you watched Hera finish it, dressing the ruined girl in the shape of a bear as a mockery, one step over the human line, sacred to the very goddess who had cast her out. You watched her wander years in that shape, remembering everything, and you watched her rise at last into the northern sky, the great bear, circling forever, never setting, never resting, never reachable. Callisto, the one she could not protect. I cannot prove to you that Brauron was an answer to Callisto. No inscription says so. The scholars, careful people, note the connection and step around it. But stand in that courtyard at evening and look at what is actually happening, and then tell me the shapes do not fit. Here is the goddess who once lost a girl to the bear's shape. A girl the law punished when the law should have shielded her. And here, generation after generation, century after century, the families of Athens bring their own girls to her, at the age of greatest fragility, and dress them as bears on purpose, and place them under her protection, and the girls dance the bear, and then walk out of the bear, safely, on schedule, back into their own lives. What was a curse in the myth became a costume in the ritual. What one girl could never take off, 10,000 girls put on for a season and set down again, lightly, in the courtyard, with the goddess watching. Whether the Athenians planned that meaning or backed into it, the meaning is there, and it is one of the gentlest things the ancient world ever built. A whole city, every year, walking its daughters up to the border where Callisto was lost, and walking every single one of them back. And do you remember the storerooms? I told you about them long ago, in the chapter about the birthing room, and I promised we would come back. This is the place. Brauron is where they kept the dresses. The inventories survive, carved in stone, actual lists that you can read today. The finest clothing of women who had come through childbirth alive, dedicated in thanksgiving, folded and shelved in her treasury, and beside them, by ancient custom, the woven garments of the women who had not lived, brought by their households and laid up in the same holy rooms. So walk the whole sanctuary now, in the failing light, and take the inventory of her real kingdom, the historical one, the one that existed in daylight for 1,000 years. In the courtyard, the little girls, dancing their way safely past the bear. In the treasury, the dresses of the mothers, the saved and the lost side by side. At the altars, the dolls and the cut locks of hair from 10,000 weddings. Everything in this place is a girl or a woman at a border, and everything in this place is under one guardianship. The myths told you what she was. Brauron shows you what she was for. And Brauron was small. That is the astonishing part. Brauron was a country shrine, a local treasure, one node in a web of her sanctuaries that ran across the whole Greek world. And at the far eastern edge of that web, across the Aegean Sea, on the coast of what is now Turkey, stood the other end of the scale, Ephesus. The temple of Artemis at Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Not a wonder of her world, a wonder of the world. Full stop. On the same official list as the pyramids of Egypt. It was the largest temple the Greeks ever raised to anyone. So vast that the Parthenon in Athens could have fit inside it with room to spare. A forest of marble columns, more than 100 of them, each one 60 feet tall, holding up a roof that seemed, eyewitnesses said, to belong to the sky rather than the building. Travelers who had seen everything wrote that nothing else compared. When it burned, they rebuilt it larger. Pilgrims came across the sea from everywhere on earth, and the city that grew rich around it minted her image on its coins for centuries. Now hold Ephesus in one hand and hold her original list in the other, the list from her father's knee, and feel the strangeness of what 4,000 years had done. She had asked for every mountain on the earth, and one city, whichever one you like. Papa, one is enough. She had asked for it the way you decline dessert, without interest, an afterthought, because she never planned to live indoors at all, and the humans built her the greatest indoor space in the history of their species. She never asked for it. That is the point, and it is the last thing to see before we leave the courtyard. Column by column, wonder by wonder, festival by festival. The human race spent 1,000 years building magnificence at a goddess whose entire recorded personality was a request to be left outside. They could not help it. It is what humans do with what they fear and love. They builded a house, as if a house were the highest gift, as if everything precious must want a roof. And she took the worship, and heard the prayers, and kept every appointment at every border. And the sources contain no evidence, none, that she ever spent a night under all that marble. The mountains stayed home. The temple was just her mailing address. The little bears finish their dance as the light goes. Somewhere east, over the darkening sea, the greatest temple on earth is lighting its evening lamps. Her name is carved now over more doorways than any wild thing could count. And history is coming down the road toward all of it, wearing Roman boots. South of Rome, folded into the volcanic hills, there is a lake that has no river. Nothing flows into it. Nothing flows out. It sits in the round bowl of a dead volcano's crater, fed by springs from below, ringed by steep wooded slopes, and because no current ever moves it. The surface lies stiller than any natural water you have ever seen. On a clear night, the moon does not glitter on this lake the way it glitters on the sea. It lands whole, one unbroken white disk, floating on the black water, so perfect that the Romans, who were not a poetic people by profession, gave the lake a name that is pure poetry. Speculum Dianae, the mirror of Diana. They believe the goddess came down on certain nights to look at herself in it. And around that crater lake, in the woods above the shore, stood one of the oldest and strangest sanctuaries in all of Italy, a sacred grove where her rites were kept in a form so ancient that even the Romans found it eerie. A priesthood out of the deep past, guarding the trees. The grove at Nemi was old, before Rome was great. Her worship in Italy did not arrive with a conquering army. It was waiting there when Rome grew up around it. Which brings us to the question of the name, because something happened between the Greek world and the Roman one. A great translation, and if you have traveled with us before, you know the strangest fact about it. When Rome absorbed the Greek sky, nearly every god was issued a new name. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Ares became Mars, Aphrodite became Venus, Hermes became Mercury. The whole family renamed, like immigrants at a harbor. With two exceptions, her brother kept his name outright. Apollo walked into Rome as Apollo, unchanged, because the Romans looked at him and found nothing in their own sky that matched him. So they took him whole, and his sister became Diana. And here is the fine print that matters. Diana was not a new name invented for her. Diana was already there. The Italians had worshipped a goddess of that name in their own deep past, a goddess of the woods and the moon and the wild margins, at Nemi and elsewhere, since before anyone wrote anything down. The name itself grows from an ancient root, meaning the bright sky, the shining one. When the Romans finally set their sky beside the Greek sky and matched the figures pair by pair, they looked at Artemis, the huntress, the virgin, the keeper of wild borders, and they looked at their own old Diana of the groves, and they realized they had been worshipping the same idea all along, on two peninsulas, under two names, without knowing it. Think about what that means. It means she was never only a Greek story. Whatever she was, the human mind kept finding it independently. Wherever forests met farmland, wherever the wild began, rename her brother, and something might have been lost. Rename her, and nothing was lost at all, because the name was never the point. The forest was the point, and the forest is the same forest everywhere. So, her second life began, and it was larger than her first. Rome, whatever else you say about it, was a machine for carrying things. Roads, laws, language, gods, all of it packed up and hauled to the edges of the earth. And as the legions marched out across 3 continents, Diana went with them, because soldiers, of all people, live their whole lives on dangerous borders, and they knew whose department that was. Her shrines went up along the frontiers of Gaul, in Spain, in Britain, at the cold, wet end of the known world. Roman soldiers carved altars to Diana within sight of the empire's last wall. Archaeologists keep finding them. The goddess of the edge of the map had been carried, altar, altar, to the actual edge of the actual map, and set up facing the wilderness, exactly where she had always faced. And the borders she kept were the same borders. Roman women labored in childbirth, calling on Diana, and dedicated their offerings to Diana. And the whole ancient contract simply continued under new management. Roman girls grew up under her eye. The hunters of Italy prayed to her before the season and hung their trophies in her groves after. Even her strange old double edge survived intact. The protector, who was also the sudden gentle arrow. Nothing essential had changed, only the paperwork. Centuries passed. The empire rose to its enormous noon, and cracked, and split, and the old temples began to close. Honor be honor, all over the world, by law and by neglect, and the long twilight of the ancient gods set in. Her brother's oracle at Delphi fell silent, and we stood together once, in another story, and heard its last message. The wells of prophecy dried up. Jupiter faded into literature. Mars became a month and a planet. On by on, the great names let go of the living world and settled into books. Hers did not let go. Hers held on, longest of all, and it held on in the dark, and it held on at the edges. And honestly, where else would it hold on? Long after the last temple of Diana was locked, deep into the Christian centuries, the record begins to fill with a strange, persistent complaint. churchmen across Europe, in country after country. Write it down again and again. There are women, they say, misguided women in the villages, who believe that on certain nights they ride out in the train of Diana, following the goddess across great distances in the dark, around the year 900. A famous church document names her outright and instructs priests to preach against the belief, and its language is almost weary, because plainly the preaching was not working. 1,000 years after the myths, 1,000 years after Brauron, the peasant women of Europe were still slipping out of the daylight world at night, in their minds, and running the wild borders with Diana. The priests called it delusion. Call it what you like. Here is what it is evidence of. Every other Olympian needed a temple to survive. An institution. Marble. A priesthood. An address. When the addresses closed, they died into poetry. She alone had never lived at her addresses. Her sanctuaries were mailing addresses. Remember. And her real kingdom was the one thing Rome could not close, and the church could not lock. The dark past the last fence. The country, at the edge of every village on earth. As long as that country existed, she had somewhere to be. The last of the old gods to fade from the folk imagination of Europe was not the king of the sky, and not the god of the sun. It was the lady of the woods, still moving through the trees after the whole ancient world had gone to sleep, still doing the only thing she had ever asked to do. The lake at Nemi is still there. By the way, you can visit it. The crater still holds its round black mirror of water, and the woods still come down the slopes, and on clear nights the moon still lands on the surface whole. One white, unbroken disk, the way it has landed since before Rome had a name. The moon. Yes, it is time we talked about the moon, because of everything the world remembers about her now. The moon comes first. Say her name today. Either of her names. And the picture that rises is silver light and night sky. And the honest, fascinating truth. The truth this whole next chapter is for, is that it was not always hers. The moon began as another goddess entirely, and how it came to belong to Artemis, how it drifted across the ancient sky from one owner to another and settled on her and never left, is the story of the strangest and most fitting inheritance in all of mythology, because some faces, it turns out, were simply made for that mirror. Come stand on a hillside in Greece, 3,000 years ago, and look up at the full moon with the oldest eyes we have. A shepherd is out with his flock on the slopes, and the moon is climbing over the sea, enormous and silver, laying a road of light across the water. Ask him whose face that is. And here is the surprise, waiting at the bottom of this whole chapter. He will not say Artemis. He will say Selene, because in the beginning, the moon had its own goddess, entire and complete, and her name was Selene, and she was older than the Olympians. She belonged to the generation of the Titans, the elder gods, the same family that gave the Greeks their first sun god, Helios, the one who drove the burning chariot before anyone imagined Apollo holding those reins. Selene was the moon the way Helios was the sun, not the goddess of it, but the thing itself, the silver disk in person, driving her own quiet chariot across the night with a pair of pale horses while the world slept under her. The oldest poems are clear about this. When Homer's heroes look up at night, Selene is what they see. Artemis, in those same poems, is down in the hills with her bow and her hounds, running the dark country, and the two of them are simply different beings, the lamp in the sky and the huntress under it, and no one confused them any more than you would confuse a streetlight with the woman walking beneath it. So how did the moon change hands? Slowly, That is the honest answer. And the fascinating one. There was no myth about it. No war in heaven. No decree. What happened instead happened inside the human imagination. Over centuries. The way a river moves a coastline. The Greeks looked at the moon, night after night, generation after generation, and they looked at what they knew of Artemis. And somewhere deep below the level of decision, the two ideas began to drift toward each other. Think about why. Her brother was busy absorbing the sun in exactly the same slow way. Apollo and Helios blurring together in the poems until the light simply belonged to him. Symmetry pulled at the twins the way gravity pulls. If the brother was becoming the day, the sister was going to inherit the night. But symmetry alone does not explain it. Because the deeper truth is this: the Greeks looked at the moon long enough, and honestly, enough, and they recognized somebody. Stay with me here, and look up at it yourself, tonight or the next clear night, and run the inventory with ancient eyes. The moon is seen by everyone and touched by no one. Every human being who has ever lived has known that face, and not one of them, in all the ages before our own, ever laid a hand on it. Seen by all, held by none. You have spent this whole night with a goddess whose entire existence was built on exactly those terms. Terms she dictated herself. At 3 years old, on her father's knee, the moon gives light without warmth. It illuminates everything and comforts nothing. A cold clarity, beautiful and precise and impossible to warm your hands at. Her brother's light was the other kind, the kind the world turns its face toward. Hers, whatever it touched, stayed cool. The moon rules the wild hours. It keeps no company with the marketplace and the law court. Its whole kingdom is the time when the towns are shuttered and the borders go soft, when the deer come down to the pools and the owls hunt and the wild things own the earth again. Whose hours were those? Always. And here is the last one, the one I find I cannot stop thinking about. The moon never shows you all of itself. It turns one face to the earth, forever, and keeps the other side permanently away. And no watcher on any hillside in any century ever saw the far side of the moon. A whole hemisphere, held back, a permanent privacy, built into the very body of the thing. The Greeks did not know the astronomy of that. They knew the feeling of it. They looked up at a silver presence that was visible to everyone, known by everyone, named by everyone, and that never once, in 10,000 years of nights, actually gave itself to anyone. And the name that rose in them was not the old Titan's name. It was hers. By the later centuries of the ancient world, the transfer was complete. Poets called the moon Artemis, called it Diana, without footnotes, without apology. Selene faded backward into the older dark the way Helios had, an honored ancestor, remembered by scholars. And when the Romans built the goddess of Nemi her statues, they set a crescent moon in her hair as naturally as they set the bow in her hand, and no one could remember it ever having been otherwise. The moon had found its way to the face it matched. It took 1,000 years, and it was never decided by anyone. And it was exactly right. She had asked, on her father's knee, for every mountain on the earth, the human imagination, on its own, over centuries, decided that was not quite enough, and gave her the one mountain range that no road would ever reach, or so it seemed, for the next 2,000 years. Now, come forward with me. Leave the shepherd on his hillside. Leave Rome. Leave the whole ancient world sleeping in its books, and come all the way to the 20th century, to a stretch of Florida coastline, to a warm summer night in the year 1969. There is a machine standing on that coast, taller than the Temple of Ephesus, white as marble, and it is about to leave the earth. You may have stood here before, with me, at the end of another story, because the name painted on that machine was Apollo, the program that carried human beings to the moon for the first time in the history of the species was named for the god of light, the god of the reach, across distance. And the name fit so perfectly that the whole world simply accepted it. Apollo 11 rose from the coast of Florida and crossed 238,000 miles of darkness and set 2 men walking on the silver country and brought them home. 12 men, in the end, before the program closed, every one of them a man. And then the machines fell silent, and the moon hung where it had always hung, untouched again, decade after decade, half a century of nights, until the engineers came back and needed a name, a new program this time, built to return, to stay longer, to go farther, and built around one promise in particular that the first program never made. This time, the crews would not all be men. This program would land the first woman on the moon. The people naming it reached back 4,000 years, past Rome, past Athens, past the shepherd on his hillside, all the way to a floating island in a cold sea. And they chose the twin sister, Artemis. It is painted on the rockets now. It is stitched on the mission patches, worn on the shoulders of astronauts, spoken in the flat, calm voices of launch control. The first program carried the brother's name to the moon. The one built to carry a woman there carries the sister's. And whether the engineers thought of it this way or not, the old symmetry is standing right there in plain sight. And I will say it plainly because somebody should. The brother went first, into the light, with the whole world watching. The sister follows, in her own time, by her own road. It is the oldest arrangement in this entire story. It was the arrangement on the morning they were born, and there is one more turn in it. One last gift of fit between the name and the thing, and then I will let it rest. Of all the beings, in all the mythologies of the earth, the humans chose to write her name, of all names, on their machines, and send it to the moon, of all places, to the country that is seen by everyone and touched by almost no one, the cold, bright kingdom at the edge of everything, past the last fence of the sky, where the borders of the human world finally, truly end. They could not have known, most of them, how precisely they had chosen. It does not matter. The choosing was never done on purpose, not by the Greeks, who drifted her name onto the moon over centuries without deciding to, not by the Romans, who found her already waiting in their own woods. The human mind simply keeps arriving at her, era after era, whenever it stands at an edge and feels something on the other side. Her name is on the rockets, but she was never in the rockets. And if you want to know where she actually is, after 4,000 years, after the temples and the empires and the launch pads, then there is only one place left for us to go tonight. Back to the beginning, back to the trees, one last walk in the forest, and then you can sleep. The forest again, the first one, the mountain forest in Arcadia, where all of this started, hours ago, in another life of the evening. It is deeper in the night now. The moon has crossed most of its arc and hangs low in the west, and the light comes through the pines at a long slant, laying pale bars across the forest floor. The stream is still talking to itself down the slope. The cold is still rising out of the ground. Nothing here has changed, and nothing here will, and that is the whole secret of the place. Walk it with me, slowly, one last time. There is no hurry anymore. The story is nearly done, and the parts of it are lying all around us now, like the bars of moonlight on the ground. and we can pick them up one at a time as we pass. A flat island in a cold sea, and a newborn girl turning toward her mother's pain before she ever saw her mother's face. A 3-year-old on the knee of the king of the sky, pulling his beard, reading out a list. The freedom, the bow, the running clothes, the 60 companions, every mountain on the earth, a lamplit room and a doll set aside on the floor, a birthing room at 3 a.m, and a presence at the threshold, a doe drinking at a pool, unafraid, a branch moved aside in a green valley, and water thrown by hand, and a mind trapped behind a stag's eyes, hearing its own hounds, 2 girls in the summer grass counting falling stars, and everything that was done to one of them, and the handful of words at the spring that can never be unsaid, and a bear in the northern sky, circling, circling, never allowed to rest, 7 arrows over a city square, a weeping rock in Lydia, and a goddess who forever after passed through that country without stopping, a hunter who kept up 3 stars in a row, rising every autumn, setting every spring, a shot that did not miss, because her shots never missed, and a silence between twins on the beach where they were born, a girl in a wedding dress on an altar at Aulis, and a deer where the knife came down, the one she caught, a dying boy in Trozen who knew her voice his whole life and never saw her face, and the door she could not go through, and the sound of her turning away, little girls in saffron dresses, dancing as bears, every one of them walking safely back out of the dance, the folded clothing in the treasury, the saved and the lost, side by side, a temple that was a wonder of the world, built for a goddess who never came indoors, a black lake holding a white moon, village women riding out with Diana in their dreams, 1,000 years after the last temple locked its doors, a name painted on the side of a machine bound for the Silver Country. That is the whole story. That is all of her that 4,000 years managed to write down. And now, at the end of it, we can finally answer the question I asked you to carry, all the way back at the beginning, on the mountain at dawn, where the twins stood back to back. You remember it. Is chosen distance lonely? If you build the wall yourself, does it hurt less inside it? She believed the answer was yes. She built the wall at 3 years old, item by item, and her father honored every item. And here is the accounting, done honestly. At the end of the night, the list worked. Every clause of it held. Forever. No marriage ever bound her. No household ever closed around her. No man ever claimed her. No power ever owned her. And, in 4,000 years of stories thick with gods seizing whatever they wanted, nobody ever took from Artemis the one thing she had asked to keep. Her freedom stood, unbroken, from her father's knee to the launch pads of Florida. Whatever else is true tonight, let that be said first, she asked, and it was granted, and it was never once betrayed, and every wound she ever took came in through the one door no list can close. Count her sorrows again, and look at where each one entered. Callisto hurt her because she loved Callisto. Her mother's honor drew the 7 arrows because she loved her mother. Orion, at the end of her own bowstring, because she had let one soul walk beside her. The boy, in Trozen, because she had let one mortal hear her voice. Not one of her griefs ever breached the wall. There was never anything wrong with the wall. Every grief she ever carried simply walked in through the gate that she herself opened. Each time, on purpose. Because the plain truth at the bottom of this whole story is that walls keep the world out. And nothing has ever been built that keeps love in. She could have closed the gate. That is what the 4,000 years are strangely silent about. and it is the most important silence in her story. After Callisto, she could have loved no one. After Crete, she could have let no one keep up ever again. A being with her power and her eternity could have sealed the kingdom absolutely and lived in perfect painless solitude until the stars burned down. And no force in existence could have stopped her. She never did it. The girls kept coming to her altars, and she kept every appointment. The lamplit rooms kept calling, and she kept standing at the threshold. After everything, after every loss, walked in through the open gate. The gate stayed open. She kept the whole arrangement, the freedom and the cost of it together, all the way down the centuries. And she never once asked anyone to feel sorry for her. And the record contains no evidence that she ever felt sorry for herself. Her freedom was not warm. She never asked it to be warm. She asked it to be hers. It was hers. It is still hers. And that, in the end, is why the humans could never let go of her. Why she outlasted the temples and the empires and even the other gods. Everyone who has ever lived knows the bargain she made, because everyone has stood somewhere on its terms. How much of yourself do you give away to be held? How much holding do you give up to stay yourself? Every human life settles that account differently, and most of us settle it in the middle, a little of each, adjusted over the years. She is what it looks like, settled all the way to one side, completely, forever, without regret and without exemption from the price. People have looked at her for 4,000 years the way you look at a far mountain from a warm window, not wanting to live there, glad, in some wordless way, that it exists, that somewhere out at the edge of everything, someone kept the whole of herself and paid the whole cost, and stood. The moon is nearly down now. The bars of light on the forest floor have gone long and thin, and the dark between the trees is filling in, soft and complete. Here is the last thing, and then I will let you sleep. All of this is still true. That is the strangeness worth carrying out of tonight. The temples are ruins and the myths are books, but her actual kingdom was never made of marble or of stories. It was made of the places where the human world runs out, and those places are all still here. There is wild country on this earth tonight, right now. Mountains, no road crosses. Forests, no light reaches. Some of it is not far from you. Past the edge of your town, past the last streetlight, the old country begins, the way it always has, and it does not close, and it does not sleep. The wild does not need worshippers to remain wild. The moon does not need believers to rise, and the deer are drinking at the dark pools tonight, unafraid, in their millions, across the whole turning earth, exactly as they drank when her name was spoken in temples, because the arrangement was never really about the temples. Somewhere out there, past the last fence, in the dark between the trees, something is moving tonight without a sound. It does not need you to believe in it. It does not need you to see it. It never needed to be seen. That was the first thing it ever asked. So let the forest have the watch tonight. It has kept the watch for 4,000 years, and it is good at it, and nothing that guards the borders ever truly leaves them. Let your breathing go slow and even, the way the stream goes. The moon is down. The doe is safe. The gate is kept. Sleep now. The forest is watching. It always was.